Good to see all of you. We have another good crowd of over 400 people here. And I was thinking to myself as we prepared today that there's still people that are coming for the very first time, or maybe they haven't been in the last several years. And so I thought I would just kind of go over some of the thought processes behind this event in general. What is a mayor's development roundtable? And I have somewhat of a unique perspective in that the first two mayor's development roundtables, I was an audience member. Sitting at a table and watching it all day long. And so I have that perspective, and now the last 12 years I've been able to host it and try to keep both the energy and the fundamental premise alive. And as I remember those first 2 years sitting in the audience watching, I remember thinking, here I was on the city council, eager to learn more about what was going on in the city, and you would think I was somewhat pretty high on the information stream. And when I came to the Mayor's Development Roundtable, I walked away saying I had no idea all of those things were going on in the city. And I was taking all sorts of notes because I wanted to be out championing things that were going on in our city. I wanted to be one of those people with bullet points who could defend all of the great initiatives that we were putting into place that were going to lead to some of the wonderful projects that we currently have in our city. And so I think that is still one of the fundamental concepts. We want to change the information stream so that as many people as possible have access to information about developments and financing and different areas of the city that we're trying to push people to invest in and continue to grow the city in a capital perspective. So as it evolved and we started breaking down, so what are we really trying to do here, we realized that one of the biggest assets to coming to this event was the networking opportunities that existed. If we could bring into one room bankers and developers and real estate experts, there's no telling what type of synergy, what type of conversations and ultimately results can take place from just that alone. Forget the content of what takes place on stage. Just the networking opportunities itself can lead to really wonderful projects. And so we have expanded the networking opportunities, and we've concentrated on getting those three areas of our business sector engaged and involved, and they have responded wonderfully. And many of those market sectors are now who help sponsor this event to make it bigger and better every year. So thank you on behalf of that. This is really, I think, an opportunity for us to highlight both the public sector and the private sector's development opportunities. We have an outstanding lineup of presenters today. Our kickoff keynote presenter is a senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute for Policy Research and a contributing editor at its quarterly magazine, City Journal. He is on a mission to help cities thrive in an ever more complex, competitive, globalized, and diverse 21st century. And of course, this requires building a future that is both demographically and economically sustainable and equitable. It means creating an engine of opportunity and upward mobility and a platform on which a broad majority of citizens can build towards achieving their aspirations. He is also an economic development editor and columnist for Governing Magazine. He's also contributed to The Guardian, Forbes.com, and other publications. His insights are rooted in a 15-year career in management and technology consulting, where he was a partner at Accenture. He's held multiple technology strategy roles. He has directed multi-million-dollar global technology implementations. He is a native of Laconia, Indiana, a town of 50 people along the Ohio River, and he grew up fascinated by those larger places known as cities. He's made it his life's preoccupation to learn what makes them tick. He currently lives in New York. Here to bring us our kickoff keynote and share the urban state of mind, please join me in welcoming Renn. Get out of your way.
Thank you for that introduction. Thank you for having me here. This is actually my first trip ever to Oklahoma City. So I came in a couple days early to explore, and I'm having a great time. So it's good for me to have the opportunity to visit your town in addition to being able to speak to you today. I want to start off by talking about some of the changes that have happened in America in the last 2 decades or so, because these really represent a sea change for small urban regions like Oklahoma City in America that has rendered them much more competitive in the marketplace than they probably ever could have dreamed. And as the mayor said, I grew up in Indiana, so I want to illustrate this by talking a little bit about my experiences with Indianapolis, which is a very similar sized city and a very similar place to Oklahoma City. I graduated from school in 1992 and moved to Chicago. And I can tell you that in 1992, moving from Chicago to Indianapolis would have basically been like getting sent to Siberia. I mean, Indianapolis was a bleak place in 1992. You really could not get a decent meal there. There was one good steakhouse. You couldn't get a good cup of coffee. The type of life you could live in Indianapolis then versus Chicago, it was just night and day. They were not even in the same league with each other. Well, it just so happens that last year, 2014, I spent 10 months living in Indianapolis. And I can tell you that in many respects, Indianapolis today has more and better stuff than Chicago did back in 1992, right? There's amazing coffee in Indianapolis. You know, you've so many microbreweries there, I could not get to them all. The food is infinitely better. You can now get any high-end clothing brand in the world you want shipped to you right there. The Metropolitan Opera now simulcasts the world's greatest opera right into these towns and movie theaters. Right? It's completely different. The fact is, life has just plain gotten a lot better in America in a way that has made these places so much more competitive. Oklahoma City, Columbus, Ohio, Kansas City, Charlotte, Nashville, places like you are now in the game for business and residents in a way that you never were before. And just another example of how the world has changed, when I was getting recruited by Anderson Consulting, which is now the firm known as Accenture, to Chicago in 1992, they said, you gotta meet some of the troops, right? So they had a couple staff guys take me out to lunch. And as we're going to lunch, they're making the pitch on their city. And one way they're doing it is by telling me Chicago was now a place that had this new, uber cool, super hip, amazing coffee shop. What was it? Starbucks. Starbucks. You know, I don't know if you remember, magazines still do it, right? The coolest cities. Well, in the 90s, how many Starbucks you have was frequently a metric of how cool your city was. Does your city have Starbucks yet? Well, you know, now you can get Starbucks at the truck stop on the interstate, right? There is better coffee in Oklahoma City right now than there was in Chicago in 1992. I had some. It's true, right? Life has gotten a lot better here. And the playing field has been leveled in other ways too, because some of the great things that only used to exist in those big cities have been destroyed. Now, Chicago of today is not the Chicago of 1992 either. It's an infinitely better city, but they've lost some things too. For example, they used to have this great old architectural bookstore called Prairie Avenue Books. So one of those legendary institutions that only used to exist in America's biggest cities. Well, they went out of business a few years ago. They could not survive the transition to the Amazon era, right? So sites like Amazon, iTunes have brought the world into Oklahoma City in a way that has raised these places up. But they have also brought some other cities down by clipping some of the peaks that used to exist in those places, you know, in terms of unique record stores, bookstores, et cetera. Now, I don't want to overstate the case here, right? There's still no place else in the world like New York, Chicago, and San Francisco are still unique, special places. But I am confident that if I moved to Oklahoma City, I could build a great life here, right? This is a good place to live, right? Places like Oklahoma City are no longer just great places to be from. They're great places to move to, right, in their own right. And you've done it while retaining a lot of your traditional attractions around low cost and easy living. Oklahoma City and similar places are now competitive for business and residents in a way and at a level that they never were before, right? They are just starting to emerge as prominent business hubs in America in their own right, and your city is right in the mix of that, and I think it is really backed up by a lot of those, strong demographic and economic numbers we see. The city is performing well. The problem for cities like you, though, is that the urban policy discussion has not really caught up with the reality on the ground. If you go out and read the urbanist media and look at what it tells you that your city could be or should be, the answer is basically San Francisco. Or if they're a smaller city like Oklahoma City, Portland. How many of you have been to Portland? Right? Everybody's got to make the obligatory pilgrimage to Portland. I was there last fall. It was actually my first trip to Portland. A professional cities guy who'd never been to Portland was kind of an embarrassment. So I had to correct that. I went out there and I had a great time. All of the stories about Portland are true, is real. They've done some amazing things out there. But you know what? Oklahoma City is not Portland. Indianapolis is not Portland. Nashville is not Portland. Every city, right, like every person, has its own history, its own geography, its own culture, its own economy, its own demographic makeup. Every city is unique, like every person, and every city has its own story to tell. And so every city has to find success for itself in its own unique way. And coming from a consulting background, we're always looking at the specific case. And I'm always struck that whereas every company tries its hardest to convince you of how much different and better it is than every other company in its industry, every city tries its hardest to convince you that it is exactly the same as every other city that's conventionally considered cool. And you see this by watching any city marketing video out there. You can go watch any of them. They're all basically the same, right? It's like bike lanes, coffee shops, startups, microbreweries, the bearded ones, fashion, creative class, downtown apartments, roller derby, food scene, check, 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 check. They check every box on the list. And we watch these from other cities and we say, wow, that was a little generic, right? That was a little generic. And then what do? We all go back to where we're from and we create the exact same video. And there's nothing wrong with bike lanes. I completely support bike lanes. I support all that stuff. In fact, doing those things is a big part of what has upgraded the attractiveness of Oklahoma City. So I'm all in favor of those. But there's like the equivalent of corporate best practices, though. There are things you ought to be doing. There are things you need to be doing, right, because everybody else is doing them. But you can't generate sustainable competitive advantage or set yourself in the marketplace with just a collection of Me Too items. You have to have some things that make you unique. And you would be far better off being the best Oklahoma City you can be rather than being a poor man's Portland. Or as the men's room cologne dispenser might put it, an exquisite replica of Portland. And I mean, this really means digging deep to unearth the unique culture of this place, what makes this place unique and special, and then having enough confidence to believe that that is actually a worthy and valuable thing, to infuse it into everything that you do, right? Because a great city, like a great wine, has to express its terroir. And I see some signs that you've done that, by the way. This is a more conservative city than some on the coasts. So when you said, we want to upgrade quality of place in this city, you said to yourself, hey, you know what? We do need to spend some money if we want to have nicer stuff, which we do. But what we can't do is go deep into debt doing it. So you did it through this series of MAPS initiatives, where you're taxing yourself in the now to pay cash up front for these projects. Right? And I happen to think MAPS has not gotten nearly the attention it should have nationally. And what attention it has gotten has tended to focus on the projects, which is somewhat understandable. But to me, the magic of MAPS is the financing mechanism. The fact that it's pay as you go, right? And if you look around at so many cities in fiscal distress because of all the debt and pension liabilities that they ran up, that's going to pay dividends for generations to come, because you're going to be leaving your children and your grandchildren a legacy of great streets, great parks, great schools, not a legacy of debt. So I think it starts with understanding that culture and understanding what your fundamental value proposition is as a city. You know, traditionally, I think there are two big things that, that you would have. One is it's inexpensive to live here, which I think you know. And secondly is the high quality of life that is enabled in part by ease of getting around by car. Right? So unlike Seattle, Oklahoma City is not expensive. It isn't choked to the gills with cars. Right? You combine that with your emerging amenity set in terms of food, culture, pro sports, et cetera, and you've got the makings of a real winner on your hands. And where you got to be careful is to strike the right balance between continuing to build those new amenities without damaging your traditional attractions. For example, one policy people really admire about Portland is their urban growth boundary. Back in the 70s, they drew a ring around Portland, and they said, outside this ring, no development, because they wanted to concentrate development in the core. That's part of what enabled them to create that environment we all love to go visit. Well, it also raised housing prices and traffic congestion a lot. So there were trade-offs to be made there. Now, it worked for them, but I'm not convinced something like that would work for you, because you're in a very different context. Portland's on the very expensive West Coast, so they can raise their prices and still be the lowest cost major city to live in on the West Coast. Whereas you're in a low-cost region of the country, you raise your prices, all of a sudden you're a high-cost producer in the marketplace. By the way, a fact many people don't know is that 70% of the net migrants to Portland come from California alone. Portland is not a place with millennials streaming in from all over the country. It is primarily people from higher cost locations on the West Coast moving to a lower cost city. And so you really need to apply the local context. And most of the ideas about what cities should be doing tend to originate on the coast. Cities like New York, DC, San Francisco, Portland, right? And there are a lot of great ideas we can take from there. But when we're evaluating those, we need to understand how the people in those places think and what are the unique characteristics of those cities. Because if we don't do that, and we just take their ideas and bring them here without thinking about the local context, they may not work nearly as well, or they might even do some damage to your city. In fact, one of the reasons that I started my website Urbanophile when I was a consultant is because I really saw that smaller cities in the Midwest, like Indianapolis and Cincinnati, were just passive importers of ideas from elsewhere. There was nobody really thinking about these cities on their own merits. So I wanted to kind of try to supply an indigenous R&D for the region, and I think there was kind of a hunger for that because cities deserve to be taken seriously on their own merits. So let's get specific. The standard model that is promoted for cities is high-density mixed-use development oriented by transportation around walking, bicycling, and public transit. I like that product. In fact, I live that product today. I actually published a public transit newsletter in Chicago for 3 years, so I am a public transit advocate. And I think that's a product that's much more in favor in the marketplace today than it was, back 2 decades ago. That's part of the change that's happening. The challenge comes in not when this is seen as a product that appeals to an underserved or emerging market set or as a way to revive historic or neglected areas of your city, but when it is kind of promoted as a one-size-fits-all model for everywhere, right? And if you read the people who are kind of touting this nationally, many of them are very transparent that they effectively want to halt suburban development in the US and dramatically reduce the use of the car. I think that's a mistake. I think we need to focus on raising the city up, not bringing the suburbs down, because in the global economy we live in, which is ever more complex, competitive world, every part of a region, from downtown to the furthest suburbs, needs to know its role on the team and bring its A game to the table. Right? It's like a football team. Not everybody's the quarterback, not everybody's the linebacker, not everybody's the place kicker, but everybody's got an important job to do, and they have to get it done. in order to be competitive. So I want to share 3 ideas for you, and these are really sort of ways you can think about the world here in your town and how you apply it. One is to think about the totality of the marketplace to create a kind of full spectrum community, if you will, in terms of its attractiveness. The second is to look at the different typologies of neighborhoods you have here. And then the third is really to get vanilla right. Get vanilla right. On the first point, a lot of the discussion around cities today is focused on young millennials. Reports like the famous Young and Restless report and others portray educated 20-somethings as an incredibly fickle and demanding group who are ready to move to a place that provides them with the lifestyle that they want. And because they're the in-demand labor force of the 21st century, if you do not attract this group, then you will be in trouble. The thing is, though, educated 20-somethings in the grand scheme of things is a pretty narrow slice of the market. There are a lot more people in the world than that. And what's more, people in their 20s don't stay in their 20s, right? They grow and mature. They hopefully make more money. They get a family maybe, have kids. The things that they want out of life are going to change over their life cycle. And if you're trying to really focus on that market of educated 20-somethings that want highly walkable urbanism, right, who is best provided to put that in the market? You know, people like Portland already have a 30-year head start building things like that. So what I say is, cities like Oklahoma City shouldn't neglect that by any means. You gotta be in the game there. But I would say the goal is, let's get our fair share of that market. Let's get our fair share of that market. But let's not forget about the whole rest of the marketplace, and let's say, how can we get a fair share of everything else too? And maybe there are other market segments out there that other people are not attacking as much, where you would actually be in a position to have a tremendously outsized success here. For example, one that I think places like Oklahoma City are well positioned to attract is that 30 to 45-year-old market of people exiting global cities like New York, San Francisco, or even a Dallas or a Houston. Maybe they're never going to make enough money to truly afford a humane lifestyle there. Maybe they've had kids and their priorities are changing. But for whatever reason, they're just part of the natural cycling out of people in those places, so they're kind of looking for an exit strategy, right? So I live in a 1-bedroom apartment in New York. Realistically, that's as good as it's ever going to get for me. And I like it now, but is that going to satisfy me for the rest of my life? I don't know. Is that going to be good enough if I have children? Probably not, right? And people in that age group are still young enough to be very ambitious and work really hard, long hours, but now they've got more experience under their belt, more skills, and can actually be more valuable in the marketplace. And by virtue of having spent time in these bigger global cities, they become oriented to the global economy. They've made a lot of high-level business contacts, and now they can bring that back to your city and help to orient your city more towards globalization, which is very important. So I don't want to get overly focused on that, but it has real estate implications. I know a developer in another city who's looking at a particular sub-segment of this group, and I won't go into details of what it is, but it's a sub-segment of Generation X people who want to live downtown. And the idea is that mid-career people, even the ones that want an urban environment, have a different lifestyle and product in mind than somebody in their 20s. They may want more space. They may want more amenities. So there's a lot you can do even within your urban product to appeal to a broader spectrum. And for families, you know, the single-family home remains the bedrock product in America, and you're perfectly positioned to bring that. So think about the whole market, not just extremely narrow segments of the market in terms of where you can appeal as a city. The second point about typologies is related. Oklahoma City is a very new city, but it still was built over a period of time. And the different parts of your city have kind of different styles of development that came from the eras in which they were made. And so you need to think about what you do differently in all those places that kind of work with the character of that place. So for example, in your downtown, and maybe a 2-mile radius around downtown, that is a great place for this type of high-density, walkable environment, because you need to have that product in your arsenal. And I think you're doing a fantastic job on that, just looking around. You've really done a great job of infill and renovating what buildings you have. So I don't need to say much about that, because I think you're already rocking and rolling on that front. Where a lot of cities your size run into challenges is that next ring out. These areas, like basically almost every city, Oklahoma City is a single-family home city. This is not brownstone Brooklyn, okay? And it may have gridiron streets, but it's fundamentally a suburban product in a lot of ways. And what we see is that these areas are really insufficiently differentiated from outer suburbs, such that they're kind of in competition with them, but what differentiation there is can often be negative. So a lot of these districts were built out with post-war worker cottage housing that's smaller than the market demands today. They're getting older. They often have worse infrastructure. New subdivisions today tend to have sidewalks. A lot of your city does not have sidewalks. So that creates a challenge in terms of that. And in fact, I'll put up my one and only one slide if somebody could hit that. I took a Google Maps aerial of your city. This is just an intersection on the north side. And you see it again, it's a small single-family home, low density, no sidewalks, kind of narrow corner radii on your thing. The difference, in terms of building stock and infrastructure between, say, around 20th Street and between around 40th Street, it's very noticeable, right? We can kill the slide now. Another challenge that these areas often face is on the zoning front, because at some point in the past, most cities implemented a modern zoning code based on a new suburban template, a lot of which rendered the existing built environment like this non-conforming to the codes, basically. And generally speaking, if you want to build a single-family home, you're in pretty good shape. But if you want to do anything else, certainly anything other than the kinds of strip mall development cities now don't want to see, you often need to get a variance or a rezone. And that provides a platform for the NIMBYs to come out of the woodwork and complain, which they always do, and it creates an adverse investment climate in these areas. And so I've spent a lot of time thinking about these areas because they're some of the most challenged around the country. You're actually doing pretty well on them, I think, comparatively from what I saw. I think in part that's due to the high regional growth, because what we found is that as long as regional growth is pretty high, there's sufficient aggregate demand to keep these neighborhoods in demand. But if regional growth flags, these are the places that kind of run into trouble. I think it starts with recognizing that it's not feasible or really desirable to try to transform them into these high-density, walkable neighborhoods. They're just not that. They're really small-town streets, more so than urban neighborhoods. So I suggest treating them as such and saying, in some of these neighborhoods, can we produce maybe a little Main Street district, or some type of a town square kind of district, either where it already exists that you can retrofit it, or even kind of create something new. I see that you've already done that in some of your historic commercial nodes, which I think is very great. And then start knitting them together with high quality infrastructure to produce synergies. And then to the extent that the market demands it, you can change the zoning to permit increased density very easy, simply by permitting a duplex with a carriage house anywhere you can create a single-family home today. You have tripled the effective residential density of your city with no change in the visual scale or character of the neighborhood. So I think there's a lot you can do there. And speaking of zoning, I understand, this zoning challenge is big, so I would look to say the kind of development you all decide you want to see in these areas, make sure you get the code in place that allows the vast majority of that development to be done as of right. And someone who was involved in lots of huge real estate deals over the years once told me that political risk is the only risk in real estate if you know what you're doing. And you would have to tell me if that's true or not, but I do know that in these types of cities like Oklahoma City, it tends to be that development in this historic older fabric tends to be saturated with political risk because of the zoning issues. And so I would really look to fix that. One place that's doing it is Buffalo. They've got a pending comprehensive zoning rewrite. They're rewriting their zoning code and rezoning the city from the ground up. It's called the Buffalo Green Code. I think that's kind of a misnomer because it implies that the environmental thing is really the key, which I don't think it is. It's really that they've simplified zoning tremendously by cutting the length of the code by a third, down to a third of the size it was before. And it's form-based. I don't think that's any magic. But the key is that they're trying to make it easier to do the kind of infill that they want to see. And they've been working on it for 5 years. It's still not approved. It's about to go to council. There's no guarantee it'll be passed. But if it is, we'll see what happens. That's one I would take a look at how other cities are tackling the zoning issue. And then in kind of your newer outer suburbs, especially your business center suburbs, which here, most of them are actually inside the city itself. So I say suburb as a type of development, more so than the suburbs. I would be taking a look around at what's going on with these around the country, because there's really been a focus on upgrading the quality of these. These are not your father's suburbs. There's really an attempt to transcend the traditional Ed City typology of, say, a Schaumburg, Illinois, to create more destination zones in their own right with kind of new urbanist town centers, arts and cultural offerings, higher quality infrastructure. One place that's gotten huge press for this is Tyson's Corner, Virginia, near Washington, D.C. They want to retrofit an Edge City environment into a more transit-oriented environment around the new Washington, D.C. metro line. That's an interesting story, but I don't think Washington, D.C. is really a great comp for Oklahoma City. So I'll give you a couple you can look at that I think are worth study. One is Carmel, Indiana, north of Indianapolis. It's a city of about 80,000 people, very high income, millions of square feet of office space. They have very aggressively tried to transform in terms of these new urbanist town centers. They actually built a $175 million performing arts center. I've never heard of a suburb doing that. Tremendous investments in parks, some of the best streets anywhere. It's a case worth studying. Dublin, Ohio, near Columbus, is another one that I would look at. Similar kind of place, or similar strategy, but earlier in the game. And I sort of prepared what I was going to talk about before I came here and visited, but I will say, looking around, downtown, you guys are really getting to the state of the art in what you're doing. I think what's been going on with Project 180 and like the street revamps, you're going to leapfrog most cities your size in America. I think in your kind of inner suburb, that inner core area I talked about, you're actually doing pretty good. But I would say your outer suburbs are probably what need a little attention in terms of they're not really at where the marketplace is going out there in terms of pure city areas. And then my last point is to make sure you get vanilla right. Focus on the basics of public service delivery. So much, again, the discussion around urbanism is all about kind of high-end downtown stuff, right? Stadiums, art galleries, high-end restaurants. Every city needs to have some of that stuff. But if your parks, your schools, your streets, and your crime levels are terrible, it doesn't matter, right? Esquire magazine once said, it's better to own one expensive suit that fits you than 5 cheap suits that don't. And that's true when it comes to clothes. But that mentality of just have a few good things is the wrong mentality for cities. Because the mark of a great city is not how it treats its special places, but how it treats its ordinary ones. Every city treats its special places plus special. That's the definition of special, right? Pretty much every place has great monuments downtown. So lots of places do showplace parks. But what about the average neighborhood park? What about the average street or intersection? That tells you a lot more about life as it's lived in the city. And every city does need to have special districts with higher level treatments. Downtown is a special area and needs to be treated as such. But what you don't want to do is create an A+ level kind of green zone in your core and then have the rest of the place be a D- right? We saw that in Baltimore. Give them an A+ for the Inner Harbor. The rest of the city is an F. And look what happened. You know, inclusion and equality are such core issues facing it that I think it's one where you're really positioned to do well and have an answer, because the good news is you're way better than a D- in your neighborhoods. You're doing a lot better than that already. But if you can get the average core public services, core neighborhood infrastructures at a higher level than your peers, plus have some of these special places, you are really going to have a game changer in the marketplace. And that's very important from the standpoint of inclusion, because working class communities are much more dependent on those public services, much more dependent on, say, a neighborhood park as a recreational amenity than more wealthy people who can afford to purchase their services on the open market. So that's one that I would look at as well. And I want to close by talking a little bit about where Oklahoma City is in its life cycle. I talked about the trends in America that have rebounded to the benefit of Oklahoma City. But you're well positioned in another sense, too. The cities of the Midwest and the Northeast, for the most part, they're great cities, but their glory days are behind them. Take Cincinnati. Cincinnati's an amazing city. I recommend going there if you get a chance. But Cincinnati used to be the 6th largest city in America. They called it Porkopolis because it was the meat packing capital of the country. It was a colossus that ruled the Midwest in the riverboat era. Well, it's nowhere near that today. And it's the same story for Detroit, for Cleveland, for Buffalo, for Providence. Chicago is not even the 2nd city anymore. And I love these cities. This is where I come from. I lived in Chicago for 20 years. Obviously, I think it's great. And while some of these places have more challenges than others, I believe they can all find a path forward for their city and achieve a greater success than they have today. But no matter what they do, they are never going to be as important as they used to be in this country. But Oklahoma City is different. This city has never been a bigger, more important, more prominent city in America and the world than it is right now. Oklahoma City is just now starting to emerge as a great American city, as a business node in its own right. Right? Your glory days are still ahead of you. I think that makes a big difference to still be a city on the way up, finding out how high you can go. And I always like to think back about previous generations of leaders in cities at critical moments. Think about the founders of our cities. Most of them had huge ambitions and big dreams and plans for their city. But I wonder if even they knew how big, right, these cities were going to get. Right? Chicago was boosterish back in the 1850s, but did they know it would be what it is today? I don't think so. And so there are certain key moments in time when cities are made in a way that leads to a future they can't describe. And I'd say for Oklahoma City, you're one of those generations. Right? I think you all have a sense that you've hit an inflection point, probably past an inflection point either, and have kind of bent the curve up in like a high direction. How high can it go? I don't know, right? What are people 50 to 75 years from now going to think when they look back and talk about you and what you did in your city? But I think there's an opportunity for something big here. And obviously it won't be easy. It's going to take a lot of leadership. It's going to take a lot of courage. It's going to take a lot of commitment, a lot of wisdom. It's also going to take some luck. But you have that opportunity. And that is an opportunity that does not come along for every city and every generation. So I wish you all the best in seizing the opportunity that you have. Thank you very much.
what a great message for us. Thank you so much, Aaron. We're excited to bring back the 2020 Lightning Round for a 5th year. We feature 4 local developments this time. They'll share their vision, their risks, their persistence, each in a 6-minute, 40-second long presentation. So presenting first, 20 slides set at 20 seconds each, is our first development, the garage at 800 West Sheridan Avenue. Please welcome from Claims Management Resources, Chip Fudge.
I'd like to thank Mayor Mick and everybody that was associated with putting this deal together. Some would argue that on September 8, 2009, I purchased the ugliest building in Oklahoma City. Imagine a 1930s building with no electricity or plumbing, boarded up windows or windows with chicken wire welded over the empty space to keep the homeless out. A roof that created a lovely waterfall effect every time it rained. So what was the upside, if any? Also, please take a look at this slide. This is prior to Project 180. Look at the streets. Honestly, we considered tearing the building down for parking, but I thought it had potential. First, the interior had large steel supports for a beautiful barrel-vaulted ceiling with multiple skylights in place. Second, it had 12-inch by 12-inch timber supports in the entire north and west part of the building from old-growth 85-plus-year-old lumber. Finally, it had a great history as the Wiley Stewart Machinery Company, and we had the original photos of this very beautiful building from the 30s. It is a 14,000 square foot building at the corner of Sheridan and Chartel in the heart of Film Row, just west of our headquarters, Claims Management Resources. March to October of 2014, the exterior evolution begins. All of the ugly stucco is removed and the new brick facade is replaced in front. The Project 180 street repairs are complete and all new doors, windows, roofs, and skylights are repaired. Our first tenant was Black Mint Tattoo and Art Gallery, who moved into the space September 1st of last year. Their space features the 12 by 12 timbers, all original brick, and new concrete floor with radiant floor heating. The OU School of Architecture agrees to lease this space starting in October of 2014. This may look unfinished, but they wanted all of the columns, bricks, rafters, and ceiling left untouched. We actually sprayed a matte sealer on the ceiling to keep the old paint from chipping and falling to the floor. We installed red powder-coated doors, new glass garage doors, and Art Deco awnings to recapture the period of the building, and this is what you see today. This 1920s Alamite grease cabinet is a great Art Deco piece. It came from the original Packard motor car building that I purchased in 1996 on Automobile Alley. I've carried it around for over 20 years, hoping to use it on one of our projects. The car garage and lounge was built entirely around this one single piece. Here's what it looks like today. The garage is home to 20 cars, 2 motorcycles, a vintage Dunlap, an Aston Martin signs, and one big-ass fan that you see in that picture. That's the brand name. It has radiant floor heating, painted murals on the wall that say clean restrooms and no smoking, with the original brick and overhead steel partitions all intact. It has personal, inspirational quotes throughout the space. My favorite is, "You learn more from losing than you ever do from winning," and it's enshrined next to the pool table. This building was different than many of my others because it honors my family, my friends, and important memories from my life. Here it is in mid-construction. We did a curved Art Deco ceiling that I know was just a fit for our contractors, but the Art Deco themed space works in a 1930 building, in our opinion. We imagined a space within a space. The bar area is separated by a glass garage door where the bar is separated from the car collection. This is the lounge area after construction. There is a small hand-painted mural of St. George slaying the dragon in the skylight, two 70-inch televisions with surround sound throughout the space, and a 1945 Brunswick pool table. The space is occupancy rated for 55 people, rented out to close friends, or donated for auctions or charities here in our community. The Oklahoma City Ballet is going to have their Cars and Bars event here June 6th next month. Some of you all know I like to race cars, and above the bar there is a quote that says, "There are only 3 sports, bullfighting, motor racing, and mountaineering. All the rest are merely games." Ernest Hemingway. There is a custom terrazzo floor mural commemorating the Wiley Stewart Machinery Company, which occupied the space in 1930, and we completed construction in March of 2015, and these dates are reflected in this mural. The Wiley family had owned this corner and another building west of 800 since the 1930s. I told Joe Wiley at the time I was underpaying for the 814 building and way overpaying for the 800 building. He said the only reason he sold them to me is he knew I'd do something special with them. His family was there last month for lunch, and he seemed very pleased with the final result. This is what we started with. Beige, cracked stucco, the ugliest building in Oklahoma City. This is what we've ended up with. Special thanks to Bill Gummerson, especially Jeff Blake and Bill Lapsley, who went over the top to make this thing what it is today. The last slide that we have, you might recognize this mural. It is from the book Atlas Shrugged. It was painted locally by artist Chris Presley. This is the entrance to the garage, and it's a tip of the hat to American capitalism that made it possible for us to bring this building back to life. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chip. What a great project. Our next lightning round presenter here to share an update on his wonderful project, The Rise at Northwest 23rd and Walker, for which I am especially grateful because I passed through that ugly intersection every single day for many years. Please join me in welcoming from Land Run Commercial Real Estate Advisors, Jonathan Russell.
Thank you. For many years, my company has developed in tertiary markets around the state and region. But in the fall of 2011, we decided that we wanted to not just be here for the renaissance of Oklahoma City, but to be a part of it. We searched for projects that were well positioned in the market and in their neighborhood, underutilized, with sufficient square footage to change the face of an area. But we also wanted to have a significant community impact. We soon found the properties at 23rd and Walker. They were surrounded by great neighborhoods, had huge traffic flows along the 23rd Street corridor. The properties were well positioned in the center of the state capitol and OCU. To the south was downtown and midtown, and to the north, Paseo and the western corridor. They were really right in the center of everything in this area. Another reason for my interest in the project was self-defense. My home and my neighborhood are just blocks away from this, and although the liquidation business that was occupying the premises was not aesthetically pleasing, it had held the property stable for 25 years. Now the project was for sale, and its potential for unsavory re-tenanting was a real risk. As we looked further into the project, we realized the entire block was available, dilapidated, and in jeopardy of going from bad to worse, but we felt it had great potential. The component of the project that put the deal over the top for me was the ability to construct and control our own parking. The Rise is a series of 9 independent buildings which have been modified and tied together over the decades. 7 in the primary building, and 2 out parcels to the north along Walker Avenue. My crews hauled away 26 semi-loads of inventory and countless dumpster loads of junk, and I'm not sure how they told one from the other. I don't know if you can see all the 250 toilets there, but that was a joy. As the buildings emptied, we were getting our first glances at what we were working with. I wasn't a structural engineer, but I thought this might be a problem. And it was. This issue turned into the complete rebuild of this portion of the project, including a footprint of 3 buildings on 2 levels. We found some creative construction as well. Here we have a historic facade penetrated by cast iron drain and orange angle iron, clad in wood and cardboard. It's probably not to code. The corner building that will soon be the Drake had no structural facade at all. The glass storefronts would shake to the touch. This led to the creation of the corner facade seen today at the corner of Northwest 23rd Street, Walker. Some discoveries weren't so bad. Here we uncover the Art Deco facade that became Pizzeria Gusto. Hidden behind metal cladding along 23rd Street was the cut granite facade visible today. After the removal of its coatings and decades of filth and attachment and pigeon poo, we uncovered the amazing streamlined modern facade. It spans 4 buildings and runs 200 feet along Northwest 23rd. Despite being encapsulated for better than half a century, we found it perfectly preserved. If you throw out time and money, this project went perfectly. But it's finally taken shape. After 17 structural piers, 3 buildings rebuilt, 5 burglaries, hundreds of blogs and tweets, some of them positive, and 2.5 years, we have The Rise. And our tenants are The Pump by Ian and Haley McDermott, Pizzeria Gusto by Chris Lauer and Catherine Mathis, The Drake, a good egg concept by Keith and Heather Paul, Cox Communications, my banker likes this one, The Rant clothing store by Tom Murphy, Anytime Fitness by Kyle and Sarah Griffith, Interior Guilt, a home furnishing store by Jimmy Rupp, Urban Core Pilates by Tanner Freed and Robin Ziders, an Old School Bagel by Wayne Hansen, Kyle Tapp, and Danny Cowan, and Tea, an Urban Tea House by Christy Jennings. I have so many people to thank it's impossible to mention them all, but some have to be recognized. Mr. Mayor, thank you for this opportunity. My partner, David Borman, my lender, Brad Ramsey of Legacy Bank, Meg Salyer, Ed Shadid, and the entire City Council, Assistant City Manager Dennis Clowers, Public Works Director Eric Winger, TAP Architecture, and most importantly, my team, who were willing to take on a project that was so challenging that at times it could make you look foolish. Anna Frazanki in Leasing and Design, Troy Humphrey in Development, Zach Northrup and our entire construction team, Chelsea Robinson and John Yeager in Accounting, and my little girl, Madison Russell, in Design and Inspiration. I've promised my team that our next project will be something much more simpler, non-controversial, straightforward. So I give you thank you.
That just makes me happy. Thank you so much, Jonathan. Our next lightning round presenter is from Elliott & Associates, and he'll share his vision for the Flatiron at Northwest 5th and Harrison. Please welcome Rand Elliott.
I'd like for you to meet C.F. Betters, my hero. In 1924, he built the Como Hotel with Acme brick that you can see here that's upside down, but initialed yet the same. In those early days, there were Sanborn maps that were used to identify particular areas of downtown. On the right is the site we're talking about today. On the left, the little triangular site, is the Harding Building, my office. This was called the Harrison Walnut area and neighborhood, and the Harding Building arrived in 1911, the Como Hotel in 1924. The Como Hotel was boarded up for 27 years. I've been staring out of my window at the nose of the Harding building for 20 years, and I decided it was time for a change. We began by imagining what the goals for this particular project might be, and we had 5. One was to create a gateway project into downtown. It's on the eastern edge. 2 was to create a compatible scale and proportion. Number 3 was to provide light-filled space. 4 was to create a sense of celebration in and about our community. And number 5 was to create a signature project. When we begin projects like this, as you've heard before, they become personal. The Harding building was built in 1911. It burned in 1986. Jeanette and I bought a burned building in 1991, much to the chagrin of my dad. We moved in 56 days later, and we believed it was worth saving. Today, the architecture is a very important part of downtown, and architecture itself is different than buildings. What you're seeing is both historic and new things coming together, and it's important that we save this history now and then. Architecture has, in fact, a lasting spirit. And the key to that, Vitruvius mentioned and described in 1624 when he said that great architecture has firmness, commodity, and delight, and that great buildings come from beautiful proportion and scale, and in fact, they are timeless. The Flatiron form for this particular neighborhood comes from the fact that the trolley line split through the Harrison-Walnut neighborhood. The mothership for all Flatiron buildings is in New York City at 25th and 5th. It was built by the Fuller Brush Company. This form simply illustrates purity, stability, and beauty. Brick. Brick has been used for 10,000 years. It's a timeless material. This happens to have what's called a comb finish. You can see the 1924 Acme brick and the brick we're using today. We believe that this is one of the most important gateways into downtown. 80,000 people go by this site every day. We believe that a memorable silhouette, something that really connects to history, was an important solution. And in fact, this architectural landmark should say, "Welcome to Oklahoma City." And we have an incredible view. This is a 360-degree view from the 3rd floor of this building. It has the opportunity, and gives us the opportunity to imagine the Oklahoma sky, the big Oklahoma sky, and looking into downtown from all directions. I think it's important as we go about doing these projects that we do them for obvious reasons, and one is to create something memorable. We as humans want to make something that has a lasting quality to it, and in fact, we went about this to create a landmark. We believe that we had the opportunity to create a lantern on the eastern gateway into downtown. We all know, as you've heard before, that it's more than money. That we do this because we want to acknowledge building, we want to think about its history, we want to believe that it's important. And Ralph Ellison, who was born on First Street in Deep Deuce, believed that history was important as well. He wrote The Invisible Man in 1952. Its ceiling of his fictitious character had 1,369 light bulbs on its ceiling. Hold that thought. Architecture as art is the way we believe that we can celebrate downtown as you come every night into our city and imagine what it's like. We need more beautiful architecture, as you see, is coming. And in fact, we have 46 lights that represents the fact that we are the 46th state of the Union. Details, details, details. On the left is the world's coolest dumpster enclosure, okay? The center one is fabulous toilets. Everybody knows we do great toilets. And the door handle on the right cost $8. Everyone knows that architecture is about a million details. And I can tell you that there's great pride, as you've heard today, about the fact that we've had our office in the Flatiron District for 20 years. From that position, we created the 120-acre Chesapeake site and campus, the Boathouse District, and we've become the 9th most recognized architectural firm in America. And I believe that what's important about that is that we choose to have legacy. And that it's important for us to all think about what we're going to leave behind, that we should in fact aim high and make it last 100 years. So in order to do that, it takes a great team. And on the left, you see Chuck Ainsworth with his team. two friends. You see Stan in the middle of his office, and you see a rare photograph of me from 1972 wearing a pair of $3 bell-bottom jeans. We had a great client. They're here today. Sherry and Dr. Carl Hook are here. I would just say that they certainly are in business to sell insurance to professionals, but they're among the best clients I've ever had. And great clients, in fact, make great projects. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rand. Our final presenter for this 2020 lightning round from Cornerstone Development, my friend Gary Brooks, to talk about his project at the Steel Yard.
I'm not getting old, so that's not the reason for my limp. But Aaron, welcome to Oklahoma City. It won't be your last trip here, and with all due respect to your developer friend, if political risk is the only risk in real estate, I've got a lot to learn. I'll think about it, I'll ponder on it, but I'm not sure that's the case in Oklahoma City, so with that, we'll start the slide. In November of 2012, Andy Burnett and I purchased a site in East Bricktown. What made this acquisition a little different is that I had been told, some might say warned, that this site might be undevelopable. Remediating the site of both known and unknown contaminants and an extensive utility project proved to be more challenging than we anticipated. There are a lot of great development sites in our city, especially downtown. My strategy is usually to find areas where other people are doing great things and just build around them to take advantage of the energy and excitement. That's what I did in Midtown when we developed the Edge. In this case, the opportunity to develop 400 apartments and 25,000 square foot of retail was just too much to resist. Marketplace rents have no sympathy for developer mistakes, so it was critical to identify all the problems that we would have to overcome and identify the cost in order to prepare this site for development. We knew the site had extensive history with the railroad, which used it as a rail house roundabout. The entire area was an active drilling site some 100 years ago. Since 1945, it was home to a large metal fabrication plant, which was shut down in 2003. The heavy industrial history of the property required over 2 years of remediation and restoration, including hauling off nearly 500 truckloads of contaminated soil. After a year of due diligence, including a phase 1, phase 2 engineering studies, civil and architectural contribution, environmental attorneys, and an extensive cost analysis from our contractor, we identified what we thought was a close estimate of the cost to get the site ready to develop. Unfortunately, our estimates were wrong. The site's 7.5 acres on the north side of Sheridan, bordered on the east by Lincoln and on the west by Russell Perry Avenue. Phase 1 of the Steel Yard will consist of 250 apartment units and 17,000 square foot of retail. We are under contract to sell the west corner to a Dallas-based hotel developer, and the east parcel will be phase 2 of our development. Now, developers love stories, and this site certainly has the elements of making of a great story. Brownfield challenges, the utility relocation, ability to energize East Bricktown, federal, state, and an incredible amount of city help and support, workforce housing, and LEED certification all make for a great storyline. Everyone here should do yourself a favor and go watch the movie that was written, produced, and directed by Mayor Cornett called The Boom, the Bust, and the Bond. That movie gave me a much better understanding of why our city's character is built on cooperation and collaboration, and the Steel Yard would never have happened without all those folks on the screen. One of the things that made this site difficult to accurately determine the degree of contamination was that a majority of the site was covered with very thick concrete. As a metal fabrication facility, the floor had to be very thick. To drill through those floors in multiple buildings and do an accurate study was tedious and expensive. Once we removed all the concrete and hauled off the contaminated soil, this kind of site was pretty common. Adding to the challenges that this area was once a riverbed, So some areas of the soil were very sandy, making it easy for the contaminants to move fairly easy underground. Another major challenge was relocating and removing 3 storm sewer lines that you see that run diagonally right through the middle of our site. Each of these lines is approximately 10 feet tall and 20 to 30 feet underground. The north line is the ODOT line, and the other 2 are Oklahoma City lines. We've been working on this relocation for about 6 months. It should be complete by the end of June. These 2 pictures were taken yesterday and show the removal of the first of the 3 storm sewers. We have to be careful as we're removing dirt up to 20 feet deep, not to dig up more contaminated soil during the removal process and possibly recontaminate the site. Most of the demolition material that came off the site was recycled, including 2 of the buildings, which were dismantled and reconstructed. The recycling was an important way for us to gain points under the leadership and energy and environmental design referred to as LEED, which we hope to achieve from the Green Building Council. This is what the site looked like about 4 weeks ago. Sheridan used to be down there on the right, but as many of you know, we've created a very inconvenient detour for the last couple of months. You can see the storm sewers being installed approximately 30 feet under Sheridan there. Every type of utility was involved in this relocation: storm gas, sanitary, electric, and 5 fiber optic lines. This is the inside of one of the storm sewers, give you an idea of how big these things are. Somebody said I need to put lights in there and just make it a continuation of the underground tunnel downtown. One of the unique features of Steelyard is what we call the yard. It's a small street that runs through the middle of the property that we can close off for events, concerts, and block parties. These projects we're building now, particularly the urban core, sometimes described as hotel-like because many of the clubhouse and amenities resemble a hotel, a resort, much more than traditional suburban apartments. After 2.5 years of work, I'm happy to say that we closed the loan on this project last week and officially broke ground last Friday. We'll build the garage first and then start on the 2 residential buildings as soon as we complete the utility removal. We're excited about the possibility of having one of the country's first AC brand hotels on our corner. We're under contract to sell approximately 60,000 square feet of land to Newcrest Image to build an AC and a Hyatt Place. Plans also call for an upscale restaurant on the corner and a very nice courtyard separating the 2 hotels. Newcrest is not new to Oklahoma City, as they developed and operate the Holiday Inn Express, which recently opened in Bricktown. Right now, they're going through design review process, both Bricktown and Urban Renewal, and with their respective brands, and we expect them to start construction before the end of the year. We're excited to have finally closed and completed the challenge of preparing this site for construction. The Steelyard, the 3 hotels, and the Criterion Concert Hall on the south side represent close to $140 million of private development on East Sheridan, and we believe will certainly transform East Bricktown. Thank you.
Next, we have 3 more lightning rounds. These presentations will focus on development projects happening all around the city. So starting with an update about what's happening in the Oklahoma City Boathouse, please join me in welcoming Mike Knopf.
All right, thank you, Renn. Well, it's great to be here and to share with you all the great momentum that is occurring not only in the Boathouse District, but across the city. You see this image right here. I'm happy to tell everyone today that it does hold water, okay? We have enough concrete in the River Sport Rapids that we can say it holds water. But it is a very exciting time. As Aaron said, it's really important as we consider at events like this, how can we be unique? And there's nothing like this in America in terms of what we're doing. Oklahoma City is emerging as America's premier urban riverfront destination. We're at the crossroads of America doing something that is truly a differentiator for Oklahoma City. There's no city in America that's adding as much urban outdoor adventure than we are. And it is really an innovative convergence of world-class sports, adventure, now art, and adrenaline-fueled fun. It's got to be fun, and we think we're really producing some things that are making maybe making some other cities look our way in terms of what we're doing with our riverfront. And this is what it's all about. You see this collage of images. This is all I could get on the screen. There's a lot of things that go on, but hopefully what you see in this is it's really about intergenerational activities at the Boathouse District. I mean, just a couple points. You see all the adventure, but it's a couple personal things. There's a young girl from Piedmont, Oklahoma. That's a world champion today because of learning to row in the Boathouse District. A young man from Jones, Oklahoma is on the world team now. But this is where it's heading with River Sport Rapids, $45 million MAPS 3 development. Truly spectacular in terms of what it's going to offer for this community. And hopefully by the end of today and hopefully this time next year, you all will be ready to get your PFD on and get in that raft. So this is a little tour of the River Sport Rapids. We have the main building that is actually going vertical today. We've got the restaurant site, the pavilion, which is number 3, which is where you'll get into your raft. And then 4 and 5 are the bottom pool. As you make your way up to the rafting, you actually go up a conveyor belt like a ski lift. So there's a lot of analogies to skiing. You get to the top pool. You see this other fabulous boathouse, thanks to Renn. That will be a kayak facility. And then you'll make your way down to one of 2 main channels, guided by a professional raft guide, by the way, or if you're adventurous in a kayak by yourself, and you'll go through these multiple channels. Again, it is for everybody here. But it's not just rapids and whitewater. We've got the world's tallest Sky Trail adventure course, the zip line. Again, if you have not done that yet, that needs to be on your bucket list. It's a lot of fun. We've learned a lot, thanks to the mayor, with our Oklahoma winds and how we can tweak it. He was our guinea pig, nothing like that, but also getting on the water, stand-up paddleboarding, kayaking. There's so many ways that you can get active. We have seniors that come out each week and go dragon boating, and on the flip side, 8-year-olds that are learning a new sport, a new activity that we'll have. Again, we see the Rio Olympics coming up. We'll have kids, hopefully from Oklahoma City, on the podium at the Olympic Games. We're going to have a Road to Rio festival, one of 10 cities in America, that will help us open the River Sport Rapids. That's just an example of the kind of things that are coming as a result of our riverfront. And the Olympic designation is a big part of that. It's kind of like a major stamp of kind of an affirmation about this venue. Being the home to USA Canoe Kayak. We're the home of the team that will represent the U.S. in Rio in rowing. And then you see that comes with that world-class events. This image that you see here is from the World Championship we had here on the Oklahoma River. Just last year, 29 countries came as a result of our river. But it's many, many other events, community events, from our big regatta festival in October to the Stars and Stripes event in June. And I wanted to share with you some ways how you can get engaged or how maybe you can connect to the Boathouse District. One way is Paddle Fest. This is part of our Stars and Stripes River Festival sponsored by Sandridge, and this is on June 27th. You can have a dragon boat team, and we're really trying to make a point that we're building a culture for the outdoors, for the river, and anybody can do it. And it goes with group experiences, team building, dragon boating, high adventure, coming down. You see that person jumping off the top of the Sky Trail. That could be you, you know? It's really not that scary once you make that first step. But we have 50 corporate rowing teams, dragon boat teams, and then we have our adventure season pass. I'd like to use this analogy. If you live in a major ski town, you're likely to have the lift ticket, the season lift ticket. We have really one of the premier venues of its kind in the world with whitewater, with the river. We encourage everyone to have a river sport pass. This is not a sales pitch. This is about building a culture for people who want to be involved, whether it be here, Lake Hefner, Lake Overholser. We're going to have programming at each, and this is a slide of what we're doing. We're building the Sandridge Youth Pavilion right now with Rand and Lingo Construction, and then out at Lake Overholser, we're adding $1 million worth of improvements. This is an example of how the momentum downtown is adding new improvements in other parts of our community and really going to make a wonderful community center, riverfront center there. River Sport Rapids, again, opening this time next year. I'm getting a little more worried as the rain keeps coming, but we have Olympic trials. There will be many opportunities to be involved. We're actually seeking partners who will want to be in the center, be involved in and as a result, the things that we're finding about ways people are using the river, not just for recreation, but for business, and bringing your clients down and going in the Sky Trail, going in a dragon boat, people from outside of Oklahoma City coming here, because we really have a collection of activities and meeting facilities, really unlike not many other places in America in an urban setting. And then the Glow, I wanted to share this with you. We're the only venue in the world to have not a lighted river, race course. And so we're going to add music and art and things around that with a ongoing festival. And you can see the images of the UCO boathouse down there as well, which has brought art to the river. So I'm ending, see that picture with that lady with her mouth wide open? Again, I could ask for a show of hands. Who's going to do that next year? Go ahead and raise your hand. Come on, everyone up there. All right, well, get ready, because it's less than a year from now, and it starts with the Road to Rio celebration, May of 2016. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Let's put it on our calendars now. It needs to not conflict with next year's Roundtable, though. Presenting to us next, an update and overview of downtown developments from Downtown Oklahoma City Incorporated, Jane Jenkins.
Good morning. Glad to be here today and talk a little bit about what's going on downtown. You will notice that we still have cranes in downtown Oklahoma City, and you will notice that we still have streets that are closed. Hopefully, you're still pleased with our progress and are optimistic about our future, because those cranes and closed streets means that we are still growing, and I don't think they're going to go away anytime soon. First, let's talk about some downtown hotels. In the last 15 years, we have added 1,940 hotel rooms to downtown. We recently opened the Boutique Ambassador Hotel in Midtown, the elegant Embassy Suites in the Medical District, and the neighborhood-friendly Holiday Inn Express in Bricktown. But one of the most exciting developments on the horizon is the 21C Museum Hotel. This project will really jumpstart the western edge of downtown with its development, and will complement all the efforts that we've been working on in Film Row. I, for one, am so excited to see what color our penguin will be. 2 hotels will be part of the Steelyard development that you just heard about from Gary in East Bricktown. Hyatt Place and AC will boast a combined 262 rooms, and the AC brand will be one of the first in the country. Scheduled to be completed in early 2017, these properties represent a combined $45 million investment. Other hotels in Bricktown are the Spring Hill Suites at the corner of Sheridan and Charlie Christian. The Staybridge Suites are scheduled to open on Lincoln Boulevard in the second quarter of 2017. These properties combined will add 266 rooms to our inventory. Oklahoma City will also be home to a new boutique concept hotel from Hilton called Canopy. Likely to be located in East Bricktown, OKC will be one of the first 11 cities included in the initial brand launch for this product. Each hotel is unique to the city where it's located, and also planned as a Fairfield Inn on Shields, although that location is uncertain pending location of the convention center. So it's obvious we've seen tremendous growth in the hotel industry in the last 15 years. By the end of the year, since 2000, we will have added 2,680 hotel rooms, and by the end of 2017, we're projected to add 769 more. And like many cities, Oklahoma City also has a red-hot housing market. In the past year, we have opened The Edge, a new construction rental complex in Midtown, the Carnegie, a historic renovation in the CBD, and new for sale units at The Edge in Deep Deuce. Midtown Renaissance continues to be at the forefront of the housing development in Midtown. The Marion Hotel was recently completed with 10 units and is the last of the planned historic rehabilitation projects for the group. The team's newest project will be the Frank, and it's scheduled to be completed in the second quarter of 2016 with 45 new construction units. The second phases of 2 existing developments in Deep Deuce will both happen later this year. Mosaic will have 97 units and will also be home to Leaf and Bean Coffee Shop. The second phase of the Maywood Apartments will have 160 new units and a parking structure for 269 cars. The Arts District will also see some infill housing. Civic Center Flats will have 34 residential units directly north of the Civic Center on Couch Drive. Sycamore Square will be rebranded as The Haven and will have a new construction project that will add 51 units to the complex. The existing rental project will also be remodeled. And developed by Bomasada of Houston for $45 million, the largest downtown apartment complex to date is the Metropolitan with 330 units. Located at the corner of 6th and Oklahoma, this project is currently under construction and the first units are expected to be available in the fourth quarter of this year. The Lift is just 1 unit shy of the Metropolitan. It will have 329 apartments and a 455-space garage. This project will anchor the west side of the St. Anthony campus at 10th and Chartel, and the first unit should be occupied by the fall of this year. If you've had to drive around East Bricktown, as Gary mentioned recently, you noticed you will have been stopped in about every direction where you're trying to go. But we welcome the Steel Yard, an ambitious multi-use complex that will have 250 apartments expected to open in the third quarter of next year. Phase 2 will add 146 units, and watch for more announcements of developments for this project. And now, the Mystery Towers. Clayco of Chicago is expected to build a high-rise structure on the property once occupied by Stage Center, west of the Myriad Gardens. The residential tower will be at least 26 stories with 250 rental units. This project is expected to establish the high end of the residential rental market in OKC. By the end of 2015, downtown OKC will be home to 2,839 residential units, both for sale and rental. This is an increase of 2,011 units since 2000, and the numbers look to go even higher in 2017 and beyond. Had a few extra slides, so I wanted to round out our discussion with some discussion about some major employers downtown. Also on the 499 Sheridan development will shift the boundaries of the CBD. With 690 square feet and 27 stories and 2 garages, this project will redefine the Sheridan-Hudson intersection. And GE Global Research project in the OU Health Center is scheduled to open in 2016. 2 historic Bricktown buildings are being rehabilitated for office and retail. The Rock Island Plow is the oldest building in Bricktown and will open later this year. And the Mighty Key building will be home to Tapstone Energy, which is certainly a step up from City Walk. Other renovations include the Pontiac building in Midtown at 10th and Broadway, home to Sarah Kate, the factory and sidecar. The project also features 10,000 square foot of office space, and Main Street Arcade in the Film Row Arts District is a mixed-use site scheduled to begin construction sometime this summer. They're looking for tenants. Thank you very much for allowing me to update you on some of the exciting projects we have going on downtown. I would like to remind you that this week, for those of you that work downtown, is Downtown Employee Appreciation Week. Please watch for all kinds of events that are happening for you, and note that some of them may have moved inside. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jane. Our final lightning round presenter will provide us some insight about projects taking place across the entire city. Please join me in welcoming from the Greater Chamber, Kurt Foreman.
Good morning. Good morning. I'm going to speak with my New Jersey pace with an Oklahoma City heart because I'm covering the rest of the city. So we'll go fast. We'll go fast, but glad to have you all here today. Let's go right to our first project, which is, all of you know, the BNSF rail yard. We're going to cut across the city, 156.8 acres. It will impact our economy and tinker for decades. Rail is being removed now. Nearly $500 million in future construction will happen, including 4 hangars. The first airplanes arrive in 2018, and 1,320 jobs will be created at the site. And that's only the first new mission. GE Oil and Gas Center, 95,000 square feet, $110 million opening next year. They're already on the 3rd floor. 130 people, half of those people are already here in the city from around the world in the nation. They have projects underway with Devon and Stat Oil already. The OU College of Medicine, their new building in the health center, $58 million, 400 parking spaces. This cool-looking facility is just the latest development in the area that will be continuing to be talked about as our emerging innovation center. We've already heard about the next project, but I couldn't help as we race across the city to mention it again. The Rise and the Tower Theater. This shopping center is roared back to life right before our eyes and is thriving like the neighborhood around it. And as is the case for the Rise, the Tower Theater is poised to reemerge as an iconic landmark. Once renovated, it will offer 2nd floor office and ground floor retail. The Paseo, one of our more unique neighborhoods, has 2 announced projects. Via Paseo at 28th and Walker, the southern entrance of the district, 9,000 square feet, 2-story mixed use. And the other is the Pueblo, 2 buildings on a vacant lot at 28th and Dewey. Will offer smaller than usual space for those just getting their feet wet or needing less space. Taft Stadium, 1934, used by high schools and middle schools, now home to the Oklahoma City Energy, $9.7 million in renovation. 7,500 people can fit in it. Go see a game if you haven't yet. Great time, great time. Cheerpoint is a data center company. They are adding a 69,000 square foot new data center on their 15-acre campus at 36th and Tulsa. It will be the largest of the company's 3 facilities in Oklahoma, joins a 22,000 square foot facility already here. Completion is anticipated for this summer. The company cites cost of living, electricity, and land as positives for operating data centers here. Now Southside Retail, Shadow Lake, 13 units, Retail Strip Center, Southwest 104th and Penn. Cross Timber Retail planned, 24,000 square feet across street from Crest on May in front of a new apartment complex coming together. Will Rogers World Airport. Can't talk about all the good things going out there. There's so many good ones. New consolidated rental center completing in first quarter 16 will relieve constrained capacity for that. $70 million proposed terminal expansion that will create additional gates and improve security check-in. And then Lariat Landing, one of my favorite spots, 1,000 acres on the east side. Hobby Lobby, one of our great regional success stories, global success stories, $88 million 1.9 million square foot warehouse added to their already 6 million square feet of space at their corporate campus. They employ 4,317 people here in Oklahoma City and 831 more around the state. Thank you, Hobby Lobby. Hotels, hotels, hotels. Beyond those under construction that you heard about or recently completed, another 1,750 rooms are either planned or pre-construction staged. 1,000 of those in Bricktown and downtown, 750 across the city. One factor of note, all of them are select service. Paycom, founded in 1998, is now the largest technology and software company headquartered in Oklahoma, moved into their 90,000 square foot headquarters, added a second building, and their third will go under construction in July. They hope to have 1,700 employees by 2020. Mathis Brothers, in addition to their 325,000 square foot huge system on I-40, they're putting in a 3-in-1 complex on Memorial at Hefner, Lazy Boy, Ashley, and Sleep Studio together, right next to where Papado's first Oklahoma restaurant is going to go. Quail Springs Office Market is hot. Lynn Energy, $20 million, 109,000 square foot regional center. Gulfport Energy, $30 million, 120,000 square foot headquarters just east of Jordan Advertising. And DRG, or Delaware Resource Group, a defense contractor with their $11 million, 38,000 corporate headquarters. H&M. H&M is going to have a 23,000 square foot two-story store at Quail Springs by the fall. That joins Von Maur with its 150,000 square foot center. The outlet's second phase doing well, third phase in planning stages. Ted's Cafe Escondido, Vera Bradley, and North Face all going there or there already. Chisholm Creek, Memorial Road corridor's hot. St. Anthony's new facility is open late winter. Top Golf is open, or will be open in summer, and they're doing their hiring now. Cabela's will be open in the fall. And across the Turnpike, the main event entertainment center always seems to have a full parking lot. Kimray it started in 1948, has 800 employees here in the community. They are moving their camp to a new campus, 80 acres at the corner of East Britain and Eastern, and they should begin construction in 2016 of 100,000 square feet of office and 300,000 square feet of manufacturing space. Now, 2 Gardner Tannenbaum projects, one Northgate, one Westgate. Northgate on I-35, 125,000 square foot spec warehouse, yay spec, concrete tilt wall. And then Westgate at the former Corning site at I-40 and the Turnpike, which will offer a 200,000 square foot Class A office space and campus location. And then we couldn't finish without talking maps. Expo Building, spring 2016, the largest event space in Oklahoma City. Senior Health and Wellness Centers, 2 in design work underway. Trails, 1 nearing completion, 1 under design, and 1 with the consultant in tow. And last but not least, those sidewalks, Aaron. Those sidewalks are coming together to make us a more walkable, safe, and quality of life city. That covers things. Thank you.
Good work, everyone. Thank you so much. Wow. Now I'd like to introduce our second keynote speaker, also sponsored by Midtown Renaissance. Carol Naughton helped found Purpose-Built Communities in 2008 and now serves as its senior vice president. She previously served as the executive director of the Eastlake Foundation, the lead nonprofit organization that developed and continues to implement a bold, innovative, and successful model of community revitalization that helps families break the cycle of poverty. She's an expert in public-private partnerships, and she's crafted groundbreaking alliances in housing and education. Prior to joining Eastlake Foundation, she was general counsel and deputy executive director for legal and nonprofit affairs for the Atlanta Housing Authority. Before working with the Housing Authority, she was engaged in the private practice of law with Sutherland, Asbill, and Brennan, where she primarily represented developers, lenders, and investors. She's former president of the Georgia Association for Women Lawyers, a member of the State Bar of Georgia, and a former member of the Board of Governors for that organization. Here to discuss changing neighborhoods, please welcome Carol Naughton.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for inviting me here, and for Leslie and Ian for a great tour yesterday. Aaron, for your remarks earlier this morning. You really were kind of the big picture guy, and I'm going to be the neighborhood's girl and talk a lot about what it means to have a great neighborhood and how neighborhood is so fundamentally tied to opportunity in our country, and the really exciting roles developers can play in creating wonderful opportunities for every family to meet their full potential. I love real estate developers. As Leslie mentioned in my bio, I started my career as a commercial real estate lawyer. My dad was a broker and did a little bit of development on his own. And for the last 20 years, I've worked with a guy in Atlanta named Tom Cousins, who is an Atlanta business legend and a real estate developer who has used his philanthropy the same way he used his development capital to do things that were important and big projects that other people thought couldn't happen. And we've got a lot of other developers who work with us around the country, and I'm going to highlight their roles as we talk about creating great neighborhoods in the kinds of places that sometimes get left behind. Neighborhoods. We all live in neighborhoods. We all think we know what we like in neighborhoods, but but the reality is people like different things, and as Aaron pointed out, they like different things at different points in their life. When I was a young mother with 2 young children, I liked the idea that I had a backyard for my kids to be able to run around in. I liked the idea that the school was a half a block from our house and that they could walk to it. Now that I'm an empty nester, I'm thinking about a very different kind of lifestyle. And so I care for a different neighborhood now. We all think about it, we all know it, but we know neighborhoods change, and we know our needs and our tastes change throughout our life cycle. I want to talk a minute about how cities think about the way they deliver services. Most cities, and I certainly am not speaking about Oklahoma City because I don't know it as well, but most cities think about how they deliver city services in silos. So they think about police and fire and water and sewer and parks and rec and planning, and they all deliver those in a siloed impact. And as they do that, you know, the city gets a set of measures, so they know how the city is doing, looking at the delivery of services through that siloed lens. But those of us who live in cities live in neighborhoods, and we experience the delivery of those services more on the horizontal level. Our neighborhoods cut through all of those services. And so I might say that when cities think about, are they meeting their metrics, the metric that they should be looking at that they often leave off is, how are our neighborhoods doing? If our neighborhoods are doing well, if you have a city that is 100% healthy neighborhoods, you have a city that's 100% healthy. If you have a city where neighborhoods are not working for people, you don't have a great city, even if all the metrics that come out of the silos suggest otherwise. I'm going to take a step back now and think about the kinds of neighborhoods that I care about particularly. My work over the last 20 years has focused on neighborhoods of concentrated poverty, and I wanted to ground us in just kind of where we are in this country. Over 48 million Americans live in poverty. That's 1 in 10 Americans. We've also become much less likely to be able to move up the food chain. I think one of the things that we have been great, and one of the reasons we have always attracted great people to come to our country, is that the idea of the American dream, that if we work hard and play by the rules, we can create better opportunities for ourselves and our children. That is becoming a much harder thing to happen, and I'll show you a little bit of that with more specificity in a moment. Poverty impacts children at an even higher rate than it impacts adults. 1 in 4 American children live in poverty, and 50% of those low-income kids live in neighborhoods of concentrated poverty. And those are the neighborhoods that I care about. And in this case, we're talking about concentrated poverty, or places where more than 30% of families live below the federal poverty line. And just for your information, that federal poverty line is about $20,000 for a family of 4. So I might suggest if you're making $25,000, you're not exactly, you know, enjoying the big life. But the federal government would not consider you poor. So we're talking about families who are living on very little income. If you think about what the prospects are for kids who live in these low-income neighborhoods, it's really, really frightening. This is a statistic that keeps coming back to haunt me. 86% of young people, of 3rd graders, who live in areas of concentrated poverty do not read at grade level in 3rd grade. Think about that, 86%, that's 6 out of 7 kids who live in concentrated poverty don't read at grade level in 3rd grade. That's the most important statistic in predicting whether a child, a community is on a good track for economic outcomes, health outcomes, and it's a factor that most states use in determining how many prison beds they're going to need 10 years down the road. This is a really important metric to get a sense of what your life is going to be like going forward as a community. We spend about $500 billion a year. Let me correct that. We lose $500 billion a year in economic output across the country as a result of childhood poverty. I mean, that's outrageous. Think about this. When Social Security started in the 1930s, there were 150 workers for every recipient of Social Security. Today, there are 2.9 workers for every recipient. When I retire in 2030, if I am lucky, there will be 2 workers for every recipient of Social Security, and 50% of those workers will be black or brown. It is in our own economic self-interest to make sure that every child in America is growing up to be able to be successful in a knowledge-based global economy. Our lives will depend on it, not just the lives of those children. What we've also learned is that this place is really tied to health outcomes in a way that I didn't realize for a long time. If you had asked me 5 years ago whether I was in the health outcomes business, I would have said, hell no, I'm a community developer. If you asked me that same question today, I said, hell yeah, I'm a community developer. We're all about changing the social determinants of health. But like so many people, I conflated the idea of health with medical care. Health is so much more than medical care. And in fact, what we do as community developers is likely to have more of an impact on health outcomes than anything that a doctor or a hospital will ever be able to do. In fact, if you look at contributions to premature death, this is fascinating to me. 30% of premature death is just tied to your genes, just the luck of the draw, who you were born to, what genetics you have in your own body. Only 10% of premature death is tied to the quality of medical care you receive. Just 10%, but that's where we spend all the money. The reality is 60% of premature death is tied to your environment or your behavior. And those are the kinds of things that those of us who are in the community building, neighborhood building business care about. So we really have come to realize that we are the arms and legs of health outcome and community development and community and public health around the country. Neighborhoods matter in terms of climbing the income ladder. This gets back to the American dream. Raj Jetty, who's a Harvard economist, released a report a couple of years ago that looked at economic and social mobility around our country. And I'll pick on my hometown of Atlanta. It's bleak if you're in Atlanta. If you were born in the bottom 20% of the economic food chain in Atlanta, you only have a 4% chance of rising to the top 20%. Think about that. 4% chance. It's better in some parts of the country. It's better in many other parts of the country. But if you look at where it's kind of reddish on this map, you get a real sense of kind of the heat issue. And you see that how health outcomes are often tied to poverty-related issues. Life expectancy. This is really a kind of a, oh my God, slide. Life expectancy varies greatly depending on where you live. This is a slide of New Orleans. And 3 miles apart, if you live in the Iberville neighborhood, right adjacent to the French Quarter, your life expectancy is 55. 55. If you live just 3 miles up the road, your life expectancy is 80. That's, you know, a 25-year difference based on 3 miles of geography. That neighborhood matters, place matters in all these kinds of outcomes. So I took a look to see about Oklahoma County. Now, I have come to learn that the city of Oklahoma City is, in fact, in 3 counties. But I couldn't find neighborhood data, so I just pulled up the Oklahoma County data. In your state, you have 77 counties in your state. You're 33rd in health outcomes overall, kind of right in the middle. You're 26th in health factors, and you're 38th in physical environment. So with all the good things that you're doing, there's still lots of opportunity to improve your health outcomes as a result of improving neighborhoods and continuing to do the kind of work that we saw this morning. So my work has been focused on rebuilding neighborhoods, and it started in a place called Eastlake, where we had a chance to realize that people's personal opportunities are really tied to their neighborhood and their resources in their neighborhood. And it started with a real estate developer. This is not typically how I tell the story, but this is where I'm going to start today. Tom Cousins, as I mentioned before, was a real estate developer. He founded Cousins Properties over in 1958, and by 1964 had created his first family foundation. It was part of parcel who he was. In fact, it was his faith that drove him to be a philanthropist. And by the mid-1990s, I would have called him a frustrated philanthropist. He had given away a lot of money, but he hadn't seen the kinds of changes in people's lives that he had hoped to see. He had been involved in providing programming and job opportunities for men when they were getting out of prison. In fact, he built the Atlanta Omni, and he bought the Hawks, the basketball team from St. Louis, because he had to buy a basketball team to be able to finance the Omni, which was really the project that he wanted to do. But he said, gosh, there's going to be a lot of entry-level jobs here. Let's have our management company hire guys who just got out of prison, because if they have a job, then they'll be okay. They'll be on the right track. And what he found out is that everything that wasn't nailed down was stolen. And to Tom's credit, that he didn't say, oh, well, you just can't help folks. He said, then we've got to work with people before they make the mistakes that land them in prison. And that has got him thinking about young people. And in 1993, he read an op-ed piece in the New York Times that said 74% of the men in the New York State prison system came from just 8 neighborhoods in New York City. Think about that. 74% of the people, the men in the state system, came from just 8 neighborhoods in the city. He could not believe that that was true. So he called somebody in New York and they verified it for him, and he called the chief in Atlanta and said, Chief, I've read this about New York. It's been verified for me. Do we have the same situation here in Atlanta and in Georgia? And the chief said, well, yeah, Tom, everybody knows that. There are 5 or 6 neighborhoods in Atlanta that are responsible for sending most of the people in prison in our state to jail. They become cradle to prison pipelines. And so Tom said, tell me about these neighborhoods. The chief told Tom about them, and he said the worst one of these neighborhoods is called Eastlake, and it was called Little Vietnam, not because of the ethnicity of the people who lived there, but because it was a war zone. And when Tom drove out to Eastlake Meadows, he could not believe what he had seen. He couldn't believe that he was seeing a neighborhood that was really in our country, with people so disconnected from the workforce, so disconnected from the American dream, and living without hope. Let me share with you a little bit of the statistics of what Eastlake looked like. The crime rate was 18 times the national average. Almost every family was going to be the victim of a felony, not once, but every year. And Andy Young used to say that the only time the haves and the have-nots came together in Eastlake was over the $35 million a year drug trade. The housing at that point was 100% public housing. It was a terrible public housing development. It was awful from day one. It never served families well. And 40 years later, families were the longer they lived there, the further behind they fell. Hardly anybody worked. Employment was only 13%. That's the employment rate, not the unemployment rate. Average incomes were less than $5,000 a year for families, and 60%, almost 60%, relied on welfare as their primary source of income. And when we looked at education together, this is what really got our attention, that only 5% of kids in the local elementary school could pass the state math test. Less than 30% of young people were graduating from high school, and we know that they were not adequately prepared for college and career. And in some ways, looking at these statistics was really freeing. At this point, I worked for the Atlanta Housing Authority as their deal lawyer, and our housing authority was really broken at that point. And if you work for a really broken organization that's on the front end of its recovery, it's a lot like working for a startup. If you demonstrate a little bit of talent and a little bit of enthusiasm, you get to do things that are not part of your job description. And so I was there for 2 weeks, and my boss said, you're coming with me out to Eastlake. And I was like, oh no, you've clearly confused me with somebody else. I'm your deal lawyer. And she just said, there's nobody home. So I went out to Eastlake and became part of this planning committee and saw this for myself. I want to share with you the vision and the words of Eva Davis, who was the president of the Eastlake Meadows Resident Association. She had been the president for 40 years and ran this community like a Chicago-style ward boss. She was the gatekeeper. And we had to earn Miss Davis's trust and her respect before we could really work together effectively planning a new community. And she passed away 2 summers ago. Otherwise, she would be here with me today. But I'd love you to hear a little bit from Miss Davis.
2 guys got in a fight right across in front of my house. I saw one peep his head around the corner, pow, pow, pow. It was just like you was in a movie, Western movie.
Eva Davis moved into Atlanta's Eastlake Meadows housing project in 1971. It wasn't long before murder and mayhem became a way of life.
He ran right by my car and blood was just shooting out of his body. That guy shot him and he fell dead right before my face.
The 650-unit housing project was never great, but when drugs took over and gangs claimed turf, it went from bad to horrible in a hurry.
They would shoot and cut and stab and kill each other. That's what they did.
By 1995, the crime rate was 18 times the national average. This was Eastlake 10 years ago, and this is Eastlake today. Torn down, rebuilt, utterly transformed. Clean, safe, family-friendly. This was a pretty hellish place.
Pretty?
And now?
It's heaven.
Miss Davis used to say that we tore down hell, built heaven, and now we're living in paradise. And she was right. I mean, it's not really paradise, but it's pretty darn close. Eastlake today has changed dramatically. That video was from a CNBC piece that was done on Eastlake in 2007, so the numbers have changed somewhat, but I want to share with you where we are today. So crime is down dramatically, over a 70% reduction in overall crime, a 90% reduction in violent crime, and those numbers have held for 15 years. What was the highest crime precinct in Atlanta is now in the top 25% of safest crime neighborhoods in Atlanta. The housing is a different kind of housing. So it's a really kind of a suburban product, which if I had to do it over again, I would do differently. But that's what the residents wanted. They said, if that's what they have in Buckhead, which is the fancy pants neighborhood on north part of town, they said, that's what we want here. And so that's what was built, high quality mixed income housing. In our case, mixed income is 50% market rate, true market rate, no income restrictions, real debt on the property. And then 50% public housing assisted, units that actually qualify as public housing under federal law. Every building is 50-50, so you can't tell based on where somebody lives whether they receive a rent subsidy or not. And that was part of the design. Whether you receive a rent subsidy or not really isn't anybody's business. Employment. We have a work requirement. So if you live in the villages of Eastlake, regardless of your income, whether you're paying a full market rate or paying a subsidized rent, you're expected to work unless you're elderly or disabled. And so virtually everyone does. From time to time, people lose their jobs and they have to get back in a work program or find a new job, or their housing is at risk. But I will say in 15 years, we've never had to evict somebody for failing to work. People want to work. Sometimes they need help and they need support, and they need childcare and job training and whatnot. But with those supports, you can help families be successful working. In fact, the public housing families who live in the villages of Eastlake who work, their incomes are 5 times higher than they were back in 1995. And it's around education that we're really excited that we're creating this entire ecosystem of a neighborhood that supports young people to be prepared to break the cycle of poverty. In the Drew Charter School, which serves as the anchor of the education pipeline in Eastlake, serves about 1,600 children from pre-K through 10th grade. Last year, 98% of those children met or exceeded state standards, every subject, every grade, every class. In fact, 2/3 of them exceed state standards, and our school has now become a top-performing school in Atlanta in the state while continuing to serve a predominantly low-income population. In fact, I have to rush back to Atlanta later this afternoon because we have our lottery for Drew Charter School tonight. Everyone who lives in our neighborhood will get in, and then we have 2,300 other applicants from around the city, frankly, none of who will get in. And it demonstrates the demand that parents have for high-quality education. So when I worked for the Eastlake Foundation in 2000, we had all these pieces. And one of the things what we realized very quickly is co-location does not a pipeline make. And that just having all of these pieces in the neighborhood doesn't mean that they're going to work together seamlessly, organically. And we kind of thought that would happen. So the fact that we had built a really lovely, high-quality early learning center on the campus and attracted a high-quality provider, we thought, we've got early learning handled. But what we found is that provider hadn't moved in its own mind to being place-based in terms of who they were going to serve. So they served anybody who walked in the door, most of whom were people who came in from other neighborhoods who heard, there's going to be a great early learning center there. I got to get up and get my kids signed up. As a working mom, I will tell you that the second person I told after my husband that I was pregnant with my second child was the person who ran our early learning center so I could get my kid on the list. Moms are obsessed with this kind of thing. You want to get your kid on the right list. But if you're a low-income mom and you have not yet realized that early education is not daycare, but an investment in your child's future, you're going to be left behind because somebody will have come in and swooped up those spots. So what we had to do at Eastlake was work with our providers to get them to say, okay, we're only going to serve people who live in a certain geography. And what we did was say, hopefully, the campus, the 200 acres where most of the capital investment took place, and then to the extent we had spots available, the 2 single-family neighborhoods immediately adjacent to this campus. So we got better and better at this. got better at serving people in the neighborhood. Outcomes kept going up, and thousands of people kept coming to visit us every year. And they'd say, this is really cool, we want to do it too. But as the East Lake Foundation, we didn't have a way to support them. And so in 2009, Tom Cousins and two of his friends and allies, one a hedge fund guy in New York named Julian Robertson, and the other guy, a little guy in Omaha you've heard of, Warren Buffett, created purpose-built communities to help local leaders take the lessons learned from our revitalization in East Lake and other places and help them do it in their communities. Well, the first thing we had to do is say, what did we really do? What were our key strategic investments? Where were the levers of success in this work? And we realized that there was a very clear model that had emerged that can be replicated in other places. First, this is a neighborhood intervention strategy. It's not something that's a mile wide and an inch deep. It's a deep dive into a geography that people who live there would recognize as a neighborhood. Within that neighborhood, we did 3 specific strategies. One, we replaced the dilapidated, distressed, 100% low-income housing with high-quality mixed-income housing. Second, we created a cradle-through-college education pipeline, which served young people from birth all the way up through college and getting them ready to be successful in a 4-year college and career. And third, we looked at community health and wellness. What were the kinds of programs and facilities that were necessary for everyone to be able to reach their full potential? One of my wonkish friends calls that the quality of life infrastructure. And that term resonates with me. Every neighborhood, if you just have great housing, people might come for a cup of coffee, but they're going to leave if they don't have places to shop and recreate and enjoy themselves and be part of a community. So this community wellness is all of that glue in the grease that holds together a neighborhood. And then we had what we realized was a secret sauce, something that was really a distinctive factor in our work, and that was the existence of the East Lake Foundation, that organization that Tom Cousins created back in 1995, not really knowing what it would be, but that it was going to support the revitalization of the neighborhood. That organization has morphed into what we call a community quarterback that worked with the neighborhood to create the vision, that recruited partners who are necessary to execute, because you think about all this kind of work, not 1 or 2 organizations are going to do it. This is something that may require 30 different partners in order to execute well. Somebody's got to drive that and hold them all accountable and help them move forward. And that's what the East Lake Foundation does and continues to do, and it's why this revitalization gets better every year. It's why the neighborhood continues to improve and why we're breaking the cycle of poverty. So we talked about mixed income a little bit. Mixed income is so important in creating a different kind of neighborhood. It ensures higher standards in terms of the design, the operation, management of a property. If everyone gets treated as if they can vote with their feet and leave, the service level is higher, and the people who benefit most are the low-income families who never would have had a chance to live in a property as nice as this. It also attracts additional investment to the community. We were able to attract Publix grocery store and branch banks and neighborhood serving retail to the neighborhood because we redeveloped in a mixed income manner. We wanted to stimulate the market so the market would do what it did. And people would look at East Lake as a place where they want to invest their time and their money. And everybody benefits, particularly the low-income families. And third, the reality is mixed income helps destigmatize a neighborhood. And this breaks my heart to acknowledge this, but we know that there are teachers in school systems who will open a child's file and say, oh, that child's from such and such neighborhood. He can't learn at high levels. Or number 2, an employer will say, oh, she's from the projects. She's not going to be a reliable employee. When you reposition the neighborhood as mixed income, that stigma falls away and everybody benefits. The second piece is around creating that cradle-through-college education pipeline. People in the suburbs know, and suburban leaders know, that one of the most important economic generators, the economic development generators they have are good schools. For whatever reason, typically inner cities and city school systems don't think of themselves as in the economic development business, but they truly are. So we believe that you cannot have a healthy neighborhood without a healthy neighborhood school, and that's what we wanted to do, but do it in a way that created a pipeline that was guaranteed to serve kids in the neighborhood. So I'm going to brag about our kids. These scores relate to Drew Charter School, but they're not just because of Drew. They're because of the whole ecosystem of the neighborhood. So when we first opened, we were the lowest performing school in Atlanta. the very lowest elementary schools, 69 out of 69. Fast forward to 2012, 2013, and we're the #1 elementary school in Atlanta, and I think the #3 middle school. So every year we got a little bit better. This graph shows every grade, the averages of 3rd through 5th grade, every subject, and how we got better on those state test scores. When we got up to sustaining really high levels of academic performance, we did that with our school was about 80% free and reduced lunch, which is a proxy measure for poverty. At that point, when we got really good, we started attracting families with choice who had moved into the surrounding neighborhood but had not yet been willing to trust their kids' education to our school. But when we proved how good it was, because low-income kids were exceeding at that high levels, we started attracting more white kids and more wealthy kids. And we think that's great, because we think kids who go to school in a diverse environment are going to be better prepared to be successful global competitors. And our kids can compete. This is maybe the most important chart I'll show you today. These are the Atlanta elite schools. So Brandon, Jackson, Morningside, and all those other schools. Those are the schools on the north side of Atlanta that are the fancy pants public schools. Everybody says, yeah, these are the best schools. Everybody knows it. That black line through the middle is the average score of the state of Georgia on these tests. The red line is the average score of the Atlanta public school system on these tests. So you can see Drew Charter School and then all of these other schools. These are the elite academic performing schools in the neighborhood. And that's all very impressive. We compete with all these fancy pants schools. We don't benchmark against other low-income schools. We benchmark against high-income successful schools. If you look down at the red box, though, this is where it gets really interesting, where I think developers will really get this. You see the FRL, that stands for free and reduced lunch percentage. So you see Drew is over 60% free and reduced lunch and competing with all these schools that serve very few low-income kids. And if you look down right below, that's the average sales price of homes in those neighborhoods. So in the Eastlake neighborhood, in the single-family neighborhood, I went on Trulia or Zillow or one of those sites a couple of weeks ago, and I said, what's the average sales price in these two neighborhoods? $268,000. Our kids who live in public housing and in rental housing and in homes with sales price in 260 and below largely, compete against kids who live in houses that cost $1.8 million. Our kids can compete against anybody. This is why we know our neighborhood is going to be successful and why our children are going to be successful. I should mention that our low-income kids outperform the city's non-low-income kids. Let me say that again. The low-income kids outperform both the city and the state's non-low-income kids. And it's at scale. It's with 1,600 young people. So we've talked about mixed income housing. We've talked about cradle through college education. The third piece is around community wellness. You guys who are developers get this, that it can't just be one project, one housing development. You need this other infrastructure. And in Eastlake, we started with the YMCA. We started with early learning. We started with golf. Are anybody in here a golfer? Not many golfers, huh? Well, I'll talk about golf then briefly down the road. But anyway, we had lots and lots of health and wellness providers who were partnering with us, including the YMCA, which is a great place, a great community development partner. It was the first place where people came together across race and income and ethnicity in order to start to build a community. And we would not be where we are today without that great partnership of the YMCA. We've got lots of programs now that are coordinated and aligned, designed to move families up the food chain. And it's really interesting. It's not just the low-income families who need help now and again. Middle-income families need help. I'm a working mom. I've been a working mom my entire momhood. I need exactly the same kinds of support that a mom who makes $20,000 a year does. I just have more resources to pay for it. So the quality of the projects that we deliver, the quality of the projects, services we deliver, if they're not something that I'm going to be comfortable with for my kids, then they're not good enough for kids in low-income neighborhoods. One of the things that we tend to do is say, oh, that's good enough for a low-income neighborhood. Good enough is not good enough. My kids are going to get a second chance. If they make a mistake, I'm going to help them find a way forward. Low-income kids don't typically get the second and third chances that kids like mine have, and we want to put the resources in place to be able to make sure we've kind of put, as Robert Putnam said, kind of guardrails on the road of life. I mentioned our secret sauce. This is that community quarterback concept. Our community quarterback was a newly formed non-for-profit. The board members are civic and business leaders that anybody would be thrilled to have on their board. They include, you know, the head of Coca-Cola North America. They include the CEO of Bank of America, Georgia and South Carolina, the former president of the University of Georgia, the former president of AT&T. So we look for civic and business leaders who are comfortable making big decisions around lots of moving pieces. And because this takes place over a long time, we're celebrating our 20th anniversary this year, this idea of the community quarterback provides some level of political insulation, because we've had now, I think, 4 mayors during this time. We've had 3 presidents. We've had 5 city council members. And so this lead organization, this community quarterback idea, provides us with a way to keep moving forward when the world around us is changing and the support may be moving from time to time. So I mentioned that this is a deep dive into a small geography. That little orange box you see, that's about 200 acres, and we invested about $125 million in $2,000 to start on less than a 1 square mile. We created a place, and that's what you guys have done so well, and why I was so excited with what we saw earlier today. You all are creating great places. And so what we do is we know that place will serve people who live beyond the neighborhood. And in fact, in this little circle, there hadn't been a building permit issued in this neighborhood in 27 years before we started. Average sales price of a home in this neighborhood was $45,000 when we started. Now it's $268,000. So we have shown that this neighborhood is a place where people will want to make a stand, where people will want to plant their flag and say, this is where I want to live. This is good for me and mine. And they're going to stay here and take advantage of this and help create a great community. I wanted to pull out, I showed you earlier some of the rental housing in the neighborhood, but this is kind of what the housing stock looks like. I wish I had some before pictures here, but I don't. Eastlake, the Eastlake neighborhood around the villages of Eastlake was some funky stuff. There's still a little bit of opportunity there. That's what we refer to it now as opportunity. But this is the kind of housing you see, craftsman style, really, you know, pretty little bungalows. Some of them are small, 3-bedroom, 1-bath, some 3 or 4 bedrooms, 2-bath. It's just some really nice little housing stock that people have now renovated and are making a stay at. This little house I just pulled off the internet last night. It's for sale. It's about a 1,200-foot house in the Eastlake neighborhood. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths. It's on the market for $335,000. So you can see that there has been huge interest in people wanting to move to this neighborhood after it became a safe place. So Purpose Built, the group that I work for, we're a not-for-profit consulting group. We help folks do this around the country, and I'm going to show you quickly what some of them do. We've got 11 network members. We're working in probably 25 other states, or 25 other cities, to help folks implement this model. And some of the early successes are here for you to see. The first one was after Hurricane Katrina, which we started when I was still at the Eastlake Foundation. This is the St. Bernard Public Housing Community, which was in terrible shape before the storm, but after 8 feet of water sat there for 21 days, it was impossible to rebuild. So this is what it looked like. It was 54 acres. They had, where Eastlake was 55 acres and 650 units, this was 54 acres and 1,500 public housing units. Huge density. So it knocked it all down ultimately, and now have been rebuilding in a mixed income model. In this case, mixed income is 1/3 public housing assisted, 1/3 moderate income through the low income housing tax credit, and 1/3 truly market rate. And it's just gorgeous. It's award-winning, serving folks across a broad range of incomes. Beautiful design, making a beautiful place, a sense of place, a sense of scale, creating a neighborhood because everything had been washed away in this neighborhood. They've added now the first Educare Early Learning Center in the Deep South, which we're thrilled about. They're in negotiations right now to bring a charter school to the community, and Orleans Parish Schools is about to finish a new college prep high school 2 blocks from Columbia Park. So their education pipeline will be Educare Early Learning, a charter school, and then a traditional public high school. Beautiful new senior building in the community that serves about 150 seniors, but again, playing on the history of New Orleans kind of development, building something that made sense for New Orleans. In Spartanburg, North Carolina, a great team working in a neighborhood that did not have a big block of property available. So what they've done over the last 3 years, working between the city and a new nonprofit, is acquire about 400 parcels, most of which were less than quarter-acre size lots. And they've assembled all this property and done a beautiful plan, and they've submitted for a Choice Neighborhoods implementation grant. And although Choice is really, I think, biased against small towns, I think Spartanburg's got a really good chance. They've daylighted a creek called Butterfly Creek. It used to be called Nasty Branch. And it was, and the kids in the local school said, we can't call it Nasty Branch anymore, and so now it's called Butterfly Creek. One of the first projects out of the ground was a food hub in the neighborhood, because this was a food desert. And this little cafe that you see serves lunch and sells fresh foods every day. And then on Saturday, you can see the shed where they do the local farmers market now, and they have an urban farm right across the street. So you get a chance to see, this didn't cost a lot to do, but it's created great opportunities for people in the Spartanburg North Side. In Omaha, we're working in a completely different kind of environment, which is an old public housing site. The Housing Authority relocated and demolished that 35-acre site about 7 years ago with no plans to rebuild. And so when we were invited to Omaha, we advised them to try to buy that site from the Housing Authority, and they've done that. They will break ground on their first phase in the 3rd quarter of this year. We're really excited about this project. This is using philanthropy in a really different way to help reset the market in the north part of Omaha. There will be philanthropic support invested in some of the market rate housing in order to be able to build a high quality product, but be able to sell it at prices that the market will in fact bear in that part of town. And we think over time that we'll make our money, our philanthropic money back on that. Using some kind of high, edgier design than what we see in the Southeast. You know, Southeast, we all like craftsman and, you know, some of these things, which I just love. But in Omaha, they're going with kind of an edgier feel, not unlike some of the great design that we saw in some of the presentations this morning. Everybody needs some health and wellness kinds of programs. In Eastlake, we have a Publix grocery store. In Indianapolis, they just built a building that is owned by, or shared by both the YMCA and Indiana University's HealthNet program. So it combines a health provider as well as a place for you to go and take care of yourselves. Woodlawn in Birmingham, Alabama. You can see this is kind of what the housing stock looked like in Woodlawn. And we're making progress. Again, this was a neighborhood where that community quarterback had to go out and acquire property in order to be able to move something forward. And I think they were successful in doing that because people, frankly, had abandoned Woodlawn. It was a place where no one wanted to live anymore. There were a lot of vacant lots, lots of old housing. And if you could clear title, you could, in fact, buy a property. They have got under construction now the first 64 units of mixed income rental that really is going to be beautiful. And they're also doing a lot of home ownership rehab. They got a $500,000 grant from the mortgage fraud settlement process a couple of years ago, and they have reinvested that in Woodlawn. So you can see that they're doing things to bring people in who didn't currently live in Woodlawn, and also trying to do things to help support people who've been living there a long time. So I just want to end by saying neighborhoods matter, place matters. You may have seen the front page of the New York Times on Monday, a front page above the fold, talking about the new research that demonstrates where children live matter. And the earlier they're in a good neighborhood, the better they are likely to do. So find ways to continue to support neighborhoods like you do in OKC. Build great neighborhoods, build great opportunities. And if whether you want to live in a neighborhood like this, which is Atlantic Station in Atlanta, which is way too cool for me, but just gorgeous, Or if you want to live in Fall Creek Place in Indianapolis, which is a more traditional kind of neighborhood, you can create the kind of neighborhood you want, but you can decide whether your neighborhoods are going to be swamps that trap people in intergenerational poverty, or they're going to be launch pads that launch people to reach their full potential. Thank you very much. Great to be with you.
Wow, isn't she fantastic? And we want to thank Midtown Renaissance for helping to sponsor both of our out-of-town speakers. At this time, I'm going to ask Aaron Renn to come back up on stage and join Carol and I over here in these chairs. And Carol, if you'll take a seat on one of those two last chairs over there, we will start our super roundtable discussion. And I hope some people have filled out questions that they'd like these two speakers to ask. And if not, it's not too late. If you'll fill out the question and then hold it up in the air or look for one of our associates that's going to go around and pick those up, and then they'll deliver them up here on stage, and we'll try to get to as many questions as we can. So let me change tables, change microphones. God, it worked seamlessly. That was fantastic. Well, first of all, I want to get Sina's some, I guess, early impressions of Oklahoma City. You guys have been here like 24 hours now. And so you ought to have some really concrete opinions about what you've seen. And I'm cognizant also that we have people on the sides over here, so I'm going to back up just a little bit to help the angle. But let's start with you, Aaron. You took a tour of some of the city yesterday. From a visitor's perspective, a very learned and educated person about urban issues and environments, what do you see? What's your initial reaction?
Well, I've heard a lot about what you've done in terms of Project 180, in terms of maps. It was really great to get to see some of it kind of in the flesh, as it were. The downtown streetscapes look fantastic. I mean, that was the one that really struck me, is like, wow, I wish cities across America were able to do this. It's like the world did not end when you got rid of one-ways. And it's great. And I see these developments that are here. It looks like you're on your way. I would say that you could feel kind of the palpable sense of excitement and momentum and a sense of pride here that, you know, we are on our way to a better destination in the future. And so I feel very good about it. I mean, again, I always look at a place in terms of, could I live here? Is this a place I could ever personally live in? I would say this is a place you could build a great life for yourself. I could build a great life for myself here. Yeah, so, you know, definitely a good score.
All right. Carol, your initial thoughts.
Yeah, you know, it's funny, I put the same filter on. I go through lots of cities, and there's some I say, oh, no, that would not, could never see it. But there were some of the neighborhoods that we drove through yesterday really just resonated with me. Beautiful streetscapes, really pretty houses, mature trees. One of the things I really liked is kind of the resurgence of neighborhood commercial centers. And we saw some of those projects today in the flash rounds. But I really like the idea of being able to live in a neighborhood and walk a couple of blocks and go to dinner, or walk a couple of blocks and go have a drink someplace, or get a cup of coffee, or go to an exercise class. And you have lots of those opportunities. And I think that's going to serve you well over a long time.
All right, let's talk about Eastlake now. I want to ask you a question. I thought it was interesting, you know, in the beginning, to get biblical about Eastlake, because there were some true miracles that I thought you took place on the screen there. I thought it was interesting that in this you know, scenario where you're going from, you know, one of the worst neighborhoods in America to one of the best neighborhoods in America, it didn't start with government. And I'm reminded of Ronald Reagan's line that the war on poverty is over and poverty won. And I thought it was interesting that your story started with philanthropy. It started with a private sector person who had a vision and a goal, and certainly government's been involved along the ways and some sort of public-private partnership. But talk about the private sector's ability to help these neighborhoods turn around in what might have been a generation ago considered to be a government job.
Yeah, that's a great question. We think the private sector leadership is going to be the solution to helping to recreate great opportunities for families. And I would say kind of in the old model of community development, we said to neighborhoods, you have to do it by yourself. You're on your own. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And didn't necessarily provide either funding or technical support or a lot of help for people to be able to move forward, and then blame them for not being successful. Our model really relies on civic and business leaders working in two ways. First, kind of at the board level of one of these community quarterbacks, being willing to use their talents, their relationships, maybe some of their treasure and their chits for the benefit of this neighborhood revitalization. Really absolutely critical. And then execution of the plan is almost always, on the real estate side, almost always for-profit developers who say, I get this. And I recognize that I can deliver a great housing product and I can manage a great housing product, but what do I know about education? What do I know about early learning? What do I know about community building? If you can bring these people and these skill sets around us, we'll be a great partner with you there. But our deal will never be rich enough to throw off enough cash for a developer to be able to do all that kind of thing. And so if you expect a developer to do it, you're always going to be disappointed. So looking at developers and real estate people to be part of the execution team, and I want them all to make money. The more people who make money, the more people who'll be willing to do this. It's critical. But then playing that role in that leadership role, using your relationships, using your chits, and providing air cover for the hard decisions that need to be made on the ground in order to really change things. Our model is very disruptive. It is disruptive to cities, it's disruptive to school systems, it's disruptive to people who have a vested interest in continuing to do things the same way. And so having that air cover from that community quarterback, it can be a very important feature.
There's several things going on in a turnaround like this that is dramatic. There's some sort of a weed and seed approach when it deals to crime. There's an infrastructure approach. And then there's the schools, and you showed some amazing turnarounds in those schools. And I'm wondering if there isn't an advantage there in the desperation. In other words, you took an area that didn't have a whole lot going on. It didn't take much convincing the people in that neighborhood that things could be better. Is there an advantage to going into the most desperate situations when you're trying to talk about a turnaround?
You know, I think there certainly was for Project One. Because it was so clear that tinkering around the edges wasn't going to change outcomes for families in East Lake Meadows. That once we built trust and built those relationships, so somebody knew that if I made a promise, I would keep it, or if Greg or Tom or any of the other folks around the table made a promise they would keep it, then we could move forward. But now, you know, our model works better in some neighborhoods than others, and we do an assessment now to determine where the right place is. We think our model will work in lots of really desperate places, but I would say it won't work in a desperate place that is surrounded by other desperate places. It needs to be connected to something else that you can see it growing to. And so we were really careful about what neighborhoods really work for our model. And that sense of desperation can be freeing, you know? It's like, what have I got to lose?
Yeah. Aaron, we have a question from our audience who's asking about metrics, and we're all trying to compare cities. What metrics do you think are important? And what metrics should we be using today, and what metrics do you think will be important in the future about measuring cities?
Metrics tend to be touted in different respects depending on what you think tells a good story about your city. And so there's basically two schools of thought on that. One is what I call the vertical model, which focuses on things like per capita income and per capita GDP. So are your community getting wealthier and becoming more productive? And that tends to be touted by places like San Francisco that really aren't growing, haven't historically added a lot of jobs or a lot of population, but are producing fantastic wealth. The challenge with that model is that you end up in a very exclusive luxury city product that you basically look good because it's very simple. It's the nicest stuff for the people with the most money. Then there's what I call the horizontal model, which tends to measure things in terms of quantitative growth. More people, more jobs, expansion, expansion, expansion. call that the Dallas model, if we will. And that tends to be touted by rapidly growing cities. I'd say Oklahoma City's growth pattern fits the horizontal model of the city. And I think that's important. Growth never goes out of style, but ultimately part of the American dream is being able to upgrade your condition. And so I think you need to have both. We need to be able to grow the pie, but we also need to be building better pie. So I think the bedrock metrics are kind of that per capita income and per capita GDP, which measure your productivity and growth of your economy. Also, are people choosing to move here? The population and job growth, I think, are key. One that I think is underlooked is this idea of population churn. Everybody really likes to concentrate on brain drain as, well, we can't lose our young educated people. We need to keep them here. I think that's actually a mistake because places like New York, their brains leaving New York City every single day. There's just new ones coming in. And so healthy cities have a lot of churn. It's just like an economy. There's dynamic. There's kind of creative destruction going on and kind of the demographics as well as that. And also people who leave can go out into the world and get experiences which they can then bring back and connect you to the world. So I think you want to make sure that you have healthy churn and people coming in from elsewhere, but also people leaving and where they're going is important.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about economic development for a moment. There are incentive dollars in almost every community out there, and typically they are either designated to try and bring outside investors in from outside your community, or they're trying to grow the existing businesses inside the community larger. If you had a pool of dollars to spend and you were trying to look after a city, which of those two areas would you spend the greater percentage of the effort?
I think the public sector and the private sector are very much in different businesses. And so things like upgrading the streets downtown, that's clearly the public's job. Creating businesses is the private sector's job. So we do have this intersection that's common in America around incentive dollars to business. And I think the purists often say, well, you shouldn't do that. Well, the reality is that's the marketplace. Where I typically like to see investment is in creating environments in which businesses can flourish, like the infrastructure, as well as creating things like co-working spaces or incubator spaces or educational institutions to maybe help your high-tech sector. Mm-hmm. You have to build, if you're trying to launch, get a startup culture going, you need to have a lot of community infrastructure around that. So I think creating things that are kind of more shared is probably the best use of funds. To me, the economic development game with incentives is a little bit of a necessary evil, and I don't know that anybody's really cracked the code on it.
Carol, another question from our audience, and it has to do with gentrification. Mm-hmm. As after Eastlake was redeveloped, what percentage of the residents were new? What percentage of the residents were old, and did you track any of those numbers?
Yeah, it's a good question. People are worried, rightly so, about gentrification, but I think something like 90% of the neighborhoods that were poor in 1970 are poor today. Mm-hmm. So it's an issue in neighborhoods like in maybe Brooklyn mm-hmm. and in San Francisco and the East Bay and Austin and in some really hot markets, but it's not as big a problem as people tend to think it is. But let me tell you about the relocation in Eastlake and what we see in other places. About 75% of the families who lived in Eastlake Meadows chose not to come back. And that we were surprised by that. We thought everybody was going to want to come back. But when we dug down and found out why people were making choices, we had to honor those choices. We found out that if you had lived there more than 5 years, you were much more likely to want to come back to the new villages of Eastlake than if you had lived in the community for less than 5 years, and about 70% had lived there less than 5 years. We also found out that people who had Section 8 vouchers loved them and did not want to give them up. Section 8 works really well in some markets, and Atlanta is one of them. And people who had those vouchers loved that they could make choices for themselves about where they lived. And if their family needs changed 1 year, they can make a change and go live someplace else. So if they wanted to be by better schools or better jobs or near their mother or their church, they could do that, and we could honor that. We had some people who didn't come back. We had, I think, about 30 families who chose not to come back because they had somebody who wasn't going to meet the new criminal background standards that existed in the villages of Eastlake, which now, by the way, are the same standards that every public housing authority in the country is supposed to use. But this was a change, part of the Clinton administration's One Strike and You're Out program. And I remember going to talk to one mom who had been on the planning committee. She probably had 3,000 hours on the planning committee over the last few years. And I went out to say, you know, throw the bum out, take care of yourself. And she came back to me and she said, baby, I'm the only thing standing between him and oblivion. And I had to honor that, you know. I'm a mom. What decision would I make? Would I come back or would I or stay with my child? But what was interesting, because our planning process was so robust, the community agreed on the standards. In fact, the residents wanted the standards to come back to be way up here. I had to pull them back to be commercially reasonable. But nobody ever asked us to bend those rules because of this community planning process. Everybody was on board, even if it meant that somebody in their family couldn't come back or they wouldn't come back. They didn't want to be the family that kind of destroyed the vision and lowered the standards for what we had all wanted to accomplish.
Another question from our list, and I'll let each of you comment on it. By now, downtowns have been revitalized all over America, and there's certain formulas, and most of the people in this room know a certain amount of the ingredients in turning an older downtown into some level of vibrancy, and there's different success stories all over. But we haven't concentrated much on suburbia. And so obviously you're not going to change suburbia. It's going to be here 50 years from now. The neighborhoods that have been created 5 miles or 10 miles from downtown Oklahoma City are still going to be here. What are we going to be doing then, or what should we be doing now about revitalizing suburbia? What's going to be the transition point? And Aaron, I'll let you go first.
Well, that's really one of the big challenges facing America. You know, I think we focus so much on the inner city, and that's why those kind of outer urban and inner suburban areas, I've talked a lot about them because that's the emerging challenge area, particularly since there was an era in which the development standards were lower, and those are less in favor in the market. And I think where the sprawl critics are right is in one respect, which is suburbia looks very good when it's new because the economics of greenfield development are very positive. You have no accumulated liabilities. You can defer your infrastructure in many cases. Everything is shiny and new. It's market relevant. There's no redevelopment cost, no legacy cost. If it's for sale housing, you have very income stable people there. And so it looks great. And because you're growing, every business has two kinds of costs, right? Fixed costs and variable costs. And scale economics is, as you grow your units, you're amortizing the fixed cost over more and more units, and your unit cost declines as volume goes up. Well, that works for cities too. As a suburb grows, the mere fact that it's adding more people makes its unit costs go down and its taxes look good. Well, once that growth reaches its limit and maybe even goes into reverse, all those factors reverse course. You have legacy costs. Your infrastructure needs to be upgraded. Your housing is old. It's not in market fashion anymore. It's more mixed income. Pensions, you have to pay pensions because you have more public employees. And scale economics works against you in the reverse. So there's a certain life cycle of the suburb that it's shiny and new, and then 35 years later, it's sort of clapped out. And in a lot of places where there hasn't been regional population growth, that has really caused a lot of problems. So the emerging, kind of the wealthier upscale areas are trying to reinvent themselves, as I mentioned, as kind of a little bit destination urban zones in their own right. I think that's an important trend in the market. A lot of the inner suburban areas have been really been revitalized by immigrants. So I think bringing immigrants in is important. But I think as you are building out these new areas, it's important to think about what is this thing going to look like 3 decades from now? Are we building communities that are going to have staying power, that are going to remain attractive, or is someone just here because it's the shiny new thing, and as soon as they're, you know, as soon as it's old, it's going to be discarded? So we've kind of built some disposable communities, and I don't think we've cracked the code. But that's an area where we ought to be thinking about what we're developing and how does it sustain itself over the long term in the marketplace.
Carol?
I think, number one, I agree with everything that Aaron just said, and I'm particularly excited about some of the outer ring suburbs in the cities that I travel to and where I live that really are trying to create their own little sense of town squares and create a real sense of place where there may not have been that sense of place. So some of those developments are starting to really work and gain traction. But I think they should also really celebrate their assets that they have. And for example, if great schools are what a place is known for, they should figure out a way to leverage those great schools in ways maybe that they traditionally haven't thought about. The schools were just kind of always great because we had a bunch of upper middle class kids going there. Well, the population's changing. How do we retain that sense of, yeah, this is a great school with a new population that may have different needs and different challenges? So build on some of those successes and acknowledge what the challenges are going to be and address them early on.
Oklahoma City's in the process of getting ready to break ground on a streetcar. You've both seen cities that have started in a rail-based public transit system decades after it had been removed and then installed. What are your thoughts on those efforts and what it can do to revitalize or not revitalize a community?
Yeah, it's really exciting. In certain places, we have the opportunity to be doing transit-oriented development as part of a purpose-built supported effort. And I think those are the communities that 10, 15, 20 years from now are going to be just incredible. And I'm excited about that in the project we support in Charlotte and project that we support, where else? I want to say in Austin is going to have that same option, and then we're looking at one in Dallas. And so we're excited about it. I'll share with you, you maybe have heard of the Beltline in Atlanta, which is a 22-mile loop of former railroad tracks, none of which are operational anymore, that the city has figured out like kind of a 50-year vision of building light rail through there and parks and housing. And I was really skeptical. About that. And the part that is open now, I will tell you, people are building and buying and developing on that little arc of the Beltline as fast as they can. Thousands and thousands and thousands of units with just the promise of somewhere 10, 15 years down the road that there will be light rail that will connect them to the rest of the city. Right now, it's just a cement path that thousands of people are walking on every weekend, but it's just a cement path. So people are excited about the opportunity, and I think it'll be a good way to continue to do smart development and get people jazzed about living in a different environment.
Streetcars are very controversial, even among kind of liberal transit advocates. People like Matt Iglesias have sort of criticized them as saying they're slow like buses and aren't very functional. I think streetcars tend to work okay in the central city areas, downtowns, connecting stadiums and convention centers. And so my personal view, if you're looking at a bigger city in terms of transit, is streetcars are probably they're a good thing to build. They're probably not like a game changer by any means. Where I would look to make improvements in the streetcar product is the cost. I think Cincinnati's is somewhere around $120 million for 1.8 miles. The cost per mile is, the United States has by far the highest transit construction costs in the world. And I believe you're self-financing your streetcar. So I would say, how can you do everything in your power to bring the cost down to make it cost effective for your community? Forget about Buy America. Forget about all these federal standards. Find out what they do in Europe where it's cost effective, and how do we produce this thing at a cost per mile that makes more sense? So I think it's a positive thing. I don't know that it's a game changer in a lower density city like Oklahoma City.
Okay. And let me ask each of you about charter schools, public schools, your views on the controversy that's in almost every community out around the country. Aaron, you want to go first?
Yeah, I don't really comment too much on education policy because it's not my area of expertise. Definitely, you see the two problems that always faced inner city areas has been twofold. One is crime, and the other was schools. These were two of the intractable problems. Well, we seem to have cracked the code on the crime issue. we know how to make dramatic improvements in crime through things like broken windows policing, through the things that they've done in New York, which went from having close to 10% of all the murders in the United States to now having some of the safest neighborhoods in the country. It's one of the lowest crime rates. The miracle of the New York crime story is not that its wealthy areas got safer, but that its poorest areas got so much safer. Schools have proven much more intractable. We have not really, as far as I've seen, cracked the code on the problem of schools the way that we have on crime. So I can't really tell you what to do on schools, but looking at your neighborhoods that are struggling, I would focus on crime, which is an addressable issue in which a school, you can work around a school problem. Maybe you don't have kids. Maybe you can find a private school somewhere. Maybe there are ways to work around a school. You can't escape crime in a neighborhood. So that's really where I would focus my energy. I wish I had more to tell you on the education front specifically.
Carol?
So I don't think you can ignore schools. I don't think you can have a healthy neighborhood without healthy public schools as part of your neighborhood infrastructure. And there are ways to move forward. We work with both public charter schools and traditional public schools in our network of neighborhood revitalizations, almost 50-50. And the governance model is not a panacea for fixing a broken school or creating a great school. We know what the levers of success in good schools are. And fundamentally, they come down to great principals and really good teachers with high quality professional development and a relevant and rigorous curriculum. If you've got that, you're 95% of the way there. The question in my mind is whether we have the political will to do that. We know what it costs to deliver a high quality education in this country, and yet we generally choose not to do that. And then, I don't think throwing money is the right answer, but spending money smartly, wisely around strategies that are proven, where we've got good research that shows us good outcomes, we can get where we need to be with education. I actually support all of the purpose-built network members who are working with traditional public schools, while I have served on the board of a charter school for the last 10 years in Atlanta. And I will tell you, I am excited that public schools want to be at the table and want to be trying to figure out how they can be part of this neighborhood revitalization, how they can deliver a higher quality education. But I'm not optimistic that they're going to be able to do it. I think it's going to be hit and miss, and it's going to be dependent on whether they have the political will to make decisions that are in the best interest of children rather than the best interest of adults.
Aaron, there's been a lot of technology advances, and New York City is famous under the Bloomberg administration of applying technology and metrics to a lot of different factors in government. How do you see technology delivering better services for people that live in cities?
There's two aspects of technology that I see. One is sort of the private sector side, the other is the public sector side. On the private sector side, I just want to note that with the rise of open source frameworks and cloud computing, a place like Oklahoma City, you can start a company here in a way that would have been impossible back in, say, the dot-com era. It was much harder. That's why most of the tech communities outside of Silicon Valley got wiped out in the dot-com collapse. Today, it's vital to have something of a startup community here. You won't be Silicon Valley, but I think you can have something of a thriving sector, your fair share, if you will, of that industry. I do think technology is great for delivering services, but it's not a panacea. There's no app for fixing a school. I think it is an important thing. Government has historically done technology very poorly because of procurement rules that make the kind of collaborative relationships between vendors and the city that exists in the private sector. That's what I did, technology consulting. You can't have conversations during the bidding process in the way that you can have. And that, and healthcare.gov is the poster child for that. So what we've seen with New York City, a lot of it is we're going to give you the data, we're going to build the platform that allows the private sector to innovate on top of kind of an infrastructure provided by the city. And that's where I think that a hybrid public-private model there, where, yes, the city will always own and operate some technology, but how can the city provide a technology base that then the private sector, which is much better at kind of customer service, building user interfaces, innovation, can take that and maybe build things on it, and delivering amazing things you didn't even know. The classic example was Bus Tracker in Chicago, where someone sort of reverse engineered the API of the transit agency to create a phone app that told you when your bus was going to come. Well, that's pretty ubiquitous today, but part of that was just people out there in the market thinking about it. So definitely think about how the city can use technology. One, how do you get the contracting rules right to make sure that you can actually do a good deal with vendors and not end up with healthcare.govs. Even New York City has struggled with 911 centers and many other things. These are high-risk projects if you do them internally, or even if you use a consultant. And then how do you enable innovation from your local tech community to build on top of that? And that's why I say it is important to have that ecosystem of private sector tech that you can tap into as a city, because you're probably not going to have all the expertise in-house.
All right, and that's going to have to be the final word. Let's show our appreciation to Aaron Renn and Carol Naughton. It's been great having you all here. Thank you so much. I wanted to speak a little bit about some of the themes that I heard today. And I think it's a good time for us to acknowledge that one of the reasons that Oklahoma City has had so much success here over the last 20 years is the result of our economy. Because a lot of times I think too much attention gets pointed at government about different success stories and different directions and different initiatives that has passed. But the truth is that the economy is the critical factor in keeping it going. It's what creates the marketplace for new development. It's what allows philanthropy to come in and jump in on top of some of the governmental projects that Oklahoma City has been able to do. And so, we're constantly in this city, I think, trying to gauge how we're doing, because we have come so far so fast, and we don't want these good times to end. And so we're constantly looking at metrics that tell us whether we're succeeding, which direction are we headed. And I got one statistic this week that I think may surprise some people in the room, may not surprise everyone, but our unemployment level dropped again this month to 3.3%. So give yourselves a round of applause for that number. It is strikingly low when you remember that with the price of oil down considerably from where it was a year ago, I think if you had gone back in time a year ago and said the price of oil at that point was, what, 100 to 110, and now it's 60 and some change, you'd have said, well, there's no way that our economy is not going to be significantly affected. There's no way that our unemployment level is going to be, not significantly higher. And here we are with an even lower unemployment rate. In fact, we tied Austin, Texas this month for the lowest unemployment in the United States. And obviously, we've had several months now for the employment numbers to be affected by energy prices. And I'm not saying they won't. I'm not saying they aren't going to inch up next month and the month after that, especially if energy prices remain in the 50s and 60s. But what I am saying is that we seem to have done a lot of things right in diversifying the economy through the years that have allowed us to sustain ourselves in what might otherwise have been slow times. Oklahoma City has this history of the booms and busts. The Depression in the 1930s was as bad in Oklahoma as it probably was anywhere. The oil prices in the 80s probably hurt us in Texas as bad as any place in the United States. And yet here we have been through the last, what I'll call, two economic slowdowns, kind of the tech bubble of '99 and 2000, and then the real estate bubble of '07 and '08, and we really weren't impacted nearly to the level that the rest of the country was. And it's partially, I think, because if you go on the other side of those bubbles, we really didn't enjoy the increase in technology jobs in the later part of the 1990s. And we really didn't see the housing prices increase prior to the real estate bubble. And so we seem to have some sort of stabilization in there that's allowed us to weather all that. And our housing prices have stayed relatively normal, or at least have increased on a relatively acceptable plane. And our technology jobs are coming. We're seeing significant increases in all of those areas. This has been a city that has been famous for its entrepreneurial ability. And some people go back to the land run and say, you know, those were the first entrepreneurs, and that's in our DNA, and it's still continuing today. But I think it is worth noting that a lot of the jobs that we have today that could be located anywhere in the country, but that are located here, are the results of just, you know, a handful of entrepreneurs. When you look at Devon starting with a father and a son, and you look at Chesapeake starting with the handshake between two guys, and you look at companies like Hobby Lobby and Love's, again, started by family units. You know, they weren't started by people with a couple of patents from Stanford who got some investor money and then, you know, worked it 2 years, grew it, and then sold out to some big conglomerate. Every one of those companies was in it for the long haul. They weren't in it to see how quickly they could exit. And also, all of those entrepreneurs that I mentioned were from here. You know, they weren't attracted here for some significant reason late in life. They were here. And I think that story is similar in many areas of the country. When you look at Seattle and the tech boom that came after Microsoft, you look at a community where Bill Gates grew up. And when you look at Austin and the tech boom that occurred there in the 1980s with Michael Dell, well, he went to school at the University of Texas and he stayed there. And so they weren't relocating just to start their business. They were choosing where they wanted to live. And of course, the most famous entrepreneur, and I think should be noted, the one that got away was Sam Walton. I mean, Sam Walton was here until he was 2 years old. We lost him. If only we'd had a stronger pre-K program at the time. No telling what Bentonville would look like today and what Oklahoma City would look like today. I was also noting today during our speakers at some of the difficulties of comparing one city's issues with another city's issues and one city's metrics with another city's. And it got me to thinking a little bit about Walmart and how different communities view it. I was in Washington, D.C., I guess a couple of years ago, and I guess this kind of illustrates what a political nerd I am. The friend there was going to either take me to the monuments, to the museum, or they said there's a city council debate that's going to take place over at this community college. And I said, I want to go to that. And so we go into this small area with 100 people jammed in there to hear these candidates for city council debate the issues. And the issue that they were debating in this section of Washington, D.C. was Walmart. And that was the overlying issue of this debate. And the candidates didn't really see it differently as much as they were just trying to dodge all the bullets being thrown at them from the people in the room. And in this particular environment, in this particular section of the world, Walmart was viewed more than anything else as a job creator, because a Walmart store brings in a number of people who will work in the Walmart, and there might be some pad sites that would be developed as well, and it can be a significant job creator for middle class or slightly lower than middle class jobs. And earlier today, you heard Renn mention the city of Carmel, Indiana. And Carmel, Indiana is an affluent suburb of Indianapolis. They've done some terrific things. They are famous for their traffic circles. They've gotten rid of almost all the stoplights in town and have created circles. But I was talking to their long-term mayor not too long ago, who was just reelected yesterday. And he was talking to me about how they had successfully kept a Walmart from locating at one specific place in their city because they weren't interested in the job aspect of having the Walmart. And of course, that's completely different from the Washington, D.C. discussion that I had seen when they were discussing where Walmart would locate. And so I asked him, because I figured he was looking at Walmart as a job creator for Indianapolis or the Indianapolis area, but he didn't necessarily think that those jobs were worth chasing because they weren't necessarily of higher wage. And I asked him how sales tax was redistributed in Indiana, and he reminded me that although sales tax is collected by retailers all over the state, it is then sent to their tax commission and then distributed equally based on population. And in Oklahoma, of course, it's completely different. Here, municipalities must compete against other municipalities for retail because our sales tax that is generated inside your city limits stays inside your city limits. And so if you want to continue to fund police officers and firefighters and other amenities of operating your local government, you're almost forced to chase retail. And at least in this part of the country, that means forced to chase Walmart. And so here you have one organization, one giant company, and they are trying to locate their stores all over America, and you have three different governments dealing with it: Oklahoma City, Carmel, and Washington, D.C., and we're all viewing it differently. And I think that's just one example of how the federal government and state governments and local governments are all trying to deal with these issues inside of silos. And so to start comparing one city with another is really very quickly starting to be apples and oranges. In Oklahoma City, we have some historic strengths that we've been able to use to build upon in these economies. I think if you look around the region and you remind yourself that we're one of the very few cities in the United States, I know you can count them on one hand, it may just be a couple, of cities that have 3 interstate highways that intersect at one particular point. And you realize what an advantage that can be, but only now are we starting to take advantage of it. You know, 10 or 15 years ago, we had a lot of cars going through those interstate highways that didn't have a reason to stop. And it's been explained to me that if you can get a car to pull off the interstate and spend the night, the chances are that people in that car are going to spend between $200 and $300 before they're going to get back in their car and take off. And so every time I used to see one of those cars that just zipped through, all I could see was $200 that wasn't stopping in our community. And I think it's so smart of us to realize that that's one of our transportation advantages. When you're not an airline hub and you're not going to be bringing in a lot of the airline tourism type businesses, but you realize that you have these interstate highways, we've been very successful in attracting the type of tourism that can be facilitated only with real estate that involves highways. And so you look at the horse show business. You know, when 500 or 1,000 top-line horses, regardless of breed, come into Oklahoma City, chances are not a lot of them flew in on American Airlines. They came because of the great intersection of roads that we have. There's in the investments that we're making at the fairgrounds with the new expo center as far as MAPS 3 and building this huge expo center, you know, that could host, you know, farm machinery conventions or RV conventions or things like that. Other, again, great specific events that bring a lot of economy to the location that can draw these events. But these are not the type of conventions that are likely to be flown to. And certainly the exhibitors aren't going to be flying in a lot of the things that they're going to be exhibiting. Our central location, our interstate highway system is very, very important. One of the other things our forefathers left for us was Tinker Air Force Base. And you see a lot of efforts continually about trying to figure out how we can take advantage of all of the aeronautic jobs and the peripheral jobs that come with having that Air Force Base. It remains our largest employer of public and private sector jobs. And again, that's an advantage that a lot of other communities in our region don't have. We are also the state capital, and the state capital brings with it not just a lot of the jobs that come with the state employee base, but also all of the business that goes on with our state legislature. And you're talking about a budget that's what, $6–7 billion a year. You're starting to talk about a number of dollars that come out that are gathered and funneled through Oklahoma City. And a lot of commerce is developed around all of those dollar bills. when we start talking about more current things and going forward, you know, what's going to be important to us, I think we should all draw attention to and thank the previous generation for how they've set us up with water. I think a lot of people get their perceptions about water and drought from driving by Lake Hefner. And if they can see a lot of brown stuff, and if the wind blows and it's blowing dust out of Lake Hefner, they assume that rationing cannot be far away, that we are at some level of concern about water capacity. It should probably be communicated, and feel free to communicate this out, that our water supply actually is held in 6 reservoirs around the state of Oklahoma. So there are 6 reservoirs in the system that deliver water into Oklahoma City. 3 of them right now are at capacity or near capacity. Lake Stanley Draper in southeast Oklahoma City, and then McGee Creek and Lake Atoka, which are in southeast Oklahoma and connected to Oklahoma City and Lake Draper through a large pipeline. Again, 3 of our 6 lakes are at capacity. The 3 that are not doing so well are tied to our water supplies in the western half of Oklahoma. So Lake Canton, Lake Overholser, and Lake Hefner are all at much lower levels. Overall, our capacity right now is about 60–65%, and it may be rising as we speak, as rain travels across Oklahoma City. And how does that translate? Well, if it never rained again, that's enough water for Oklahoma City to consume over probably the next 2 to 3 years. And so obviously we're into the rainy season now. It is the only drought that's never ended is the one we're in. And so, I mean, it will rain again. But overall, a lot of American cities right now are trying to figure out their water supply issues or their water quality issues. And we are set up to succeed there in a very meaningful way. I have recently received some anecdotal information because we talked earlier in some of those speeches about trying to create a city where people wanted to live and where people wanted to locate. Recently in my office, I had a young woman who had just moved here from Austin, Texas. And her parents had been artists in Austin, Texas, and she was an artist. And she had relocated to Oklahoma City at age 21. And so I started to ask her about relocating here because I know not a lot of people are historically have relocated from Austin to Oklahoma City, especially young people. And she seemed to be, you know, just the type of demographic that all cities are trying to recruit. And so what was it about Oklahoma City? And she tried to communicate it in ways that, and I didn't necessarily think she was succeeding in penetrating all the factors that went into her mind. And finally she just said, Oklahoma City is what Austin used to be. And I don't know what that means. But in case somebody has figured that out, I would love to have them pass that along so we can figure out what that is. But what I think from listening to her, what she was trying to say is that it has become a city where artists are appreciated, where there seems to be a market for their goods, and there's a freedom to not only live your own life, but exhibit what the type of life and lifestyle that you want and that you can afford. I was talking to another person who was working at the Apple store in Penn Square. And they were frustrated because they thought they were about to get a promotion and then they didn't. And I may not have this exactly right, but what I think she was trying to tell me was that Apple has different tiers of employees. And after you've been with the company and in good standing for a certain amount of time, if there's an opening, you get to move up and take that spot. That kind of makes sense. Well, in this particular case, apparently there were people from outside Oklahoma City who were working for Apple who were willing to make a lateral move. So they already held that position at another Apple store, other places in the country. And so the people at our Apple store were having trouble moving up the chain because people were moving here from other communities. And I asked specifically, like, where? And this person said, well, there was one person that came in from Portland and another one that came in from somewhere in California. They didn't really know. But again, anecdotal evidence of a technology-driven demographic that obviously has choices. They're obviously working for a company that's very choosy in who they hire, and these people are choosing Oklahoma City. I was talking to a friend of mine who's in his 50s, and he told me that his brother had just relocated here from Southern California. And he'd lived there his entire adult life. But in visiting Oklahoma City several times, he saw the continual advantages of what his family in Oklahoma was experiencing. And he finally decided he wanted to be a part of it. And so in trying to decide what encouraged this person to move from Southern California to Oklahoma City, the guy had talked about the typical things, an anti-government environment, too many people, too much traffic, the things you might typically hear from a person that's frustrated with life in Southern California. Finally, they said, I finally realized I couldn't build a quality of life around weather. I thought, yeah, there's something to that. At some point, the fact that the weather doesn't change and it's fairly pleasant on 350 of the 365 days in a year, at some point that can get old for some people. And all of these are anecdotal ideas, but they are, I think, representing a very real paradigm shift in what people are looking for. People are becoming more and more choosy about where they live. And that human capital is what's driving our economy. And our economy is what's allowing the exciting developments that you heard about today take place. It isn't as if in the 1980s when the price of oil dropped from 39 to 10, it isn't that no one was enlightened in Oklahoma City about development. It was that there was just no marketplace. People were leaving. People with choices chose to live someplace else. And so if it seems like that government in Oklahoma City, or perhaps government at the state of Oklahoma sometimes spends a lot of time on economic development issues and trying to create an environment where the private sector can flourish, it's because we do. It's because we do see the importance of creating an environment where the private sector can succeed. We also have built-in strengths when it comes to the lack of traffic congestion, and we have certain strengths in the area of education. Sometimes I think we beat ourselves up too much when it comes to education in Oklahoma City. We have run metrics that show, even though we get a lot of our reputation off the largest school district, the Oklahoma City Public School System, the education that's going on in the 23 other districts that serve kids that live in Oklahoma City is quite representative of the rest of the state. In fact, if you look at Oklahoma City as a whole, K through 12 education is reflective of the state average. In almost every large city in the country, education inside the inner city of the largest cities are holding back the state levels. It's not true in Oklahoma City. And we have been very successful in pre-K education. In fact, the Oklahoma City Public School System is the largest school district in the country with fully funded all-day pre-K. Recently, the mayor of Chicago made news in running for his re-election by announcing that every kid that graduated from the public school system in the city of Chicago would have automatic tuition paid for at a community college. And he was talking about how this was a roadmap for the middle class. And as I listened, I was a little bit surprised to see both he and then the president in talking about this same formula as far as a vision for America, that we've had that in Oklahoma City for over 10 years. If you attend the Oklahoma City Public School System and you graduate, you can attend OCCC tuition free. And there are a number of kids that have taken advantage of that opportunity. but not nearly as many as you might think have taken advantage of it. And I think what it shows is that there are a lot of obstacles for a kid that lives in the inner city from attending a higher education or attending college. And that the price of tuition is not a major obstacle for most of them. There are other obstacles, and it is down to being a role model, or feeling like they have to go get a job, or just simply the expectation of going to college not being in place. And we have spent a lot of efforts in trying to change the expectations and trying to figure out the educational aspects. And we have debated the charter school versus the public school, as if we have to choose one or the other as the best course. And as Aaron said today, you know, we have had successes in urban difficulties in a lot of areas, specifically in crime. Crime is much lower in Oklahoma City than it was a few years ago. It's much lower in New York. We haven't necessarily cracked the code on trying to resolve public education. We've had examples of success, and a lot of examples of success in charter schools, but we have yet to crack the code. It's not just Oklahoma City, it's all over the country. One of the reasons that we suspect the quality of education in the Oklahoma City public school system started to suffer was the flight to the suburbs that took place in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s. In the 70s, the population of the Oklahoma City public school system was 75,000 kids. It bottomed out at 37,000 some 20 years later, so back in the 1990s. And since then, we have seen the population in the school district go up to 46,000. And so after 20 to 30 years of decline, we are now seeing significant levels of increase inside the public school system, which is an incredible turnaround and one that we should feel very good about. That lack of density keeps the school district from operating nearly as efficiently as it once did. If your geographic area stays the same and the number of kids go down, you receive less funding to educate those kids. And that less funding means you're spending more dollars on different things like transportation and facilities. And what you need is an efficiently run model, and density helps secure a better funding stream for our schools. So when you look at MAPS and MAPS for Kids and certain elements of MAPS 3 that are designed around investing in the inner city, what you're seeing is indirectly an investment that should increase the funding and therefore the performances of the inner city district. There are reasons to believe that Oklahoma City is going to continue to be a city that attracts people with choices. Around the country, there is a population shift from the northeast to the southwest. And this isn't new, but it's not slowing down. And so Oklahoma City, being in the south and the west, is gaining from cities that are in the northeast that are seeing their populations retreat. We are also benefiting from what the economists look at as the I-35 corridor. When you look at Austin and Fort Worth, Dallas, Oklahoma City and Kansas City, this is one of the hottest corridors for economic development in the United States. And so if you're looking for reasons to be confident or looking for reasons to be concerned, I would suggest that a lot of those things that you really can't affect, I mean, if you're not on I-35 today, there's not much you can do about it. But if you are, you can take advantage of it. There are a certain number of things that you can control and a certain number of things that you can't control. And we are set up to succeed in a lot of the metrics that are within our control. When you talk about water and location and traffic concerns, when you look at the things that you can't control, for instance, an act of God that could be a hurricane in New Orleans, or it could be an earthquake in California, or it could be a tornado in the Midwest. Those are the types of things that you don't necessarily have any control over no matter where you are. But when you look at the things that you can't control, other than weather, most large cities are most concerned about their state legislatures, because we operate within the enabling legislation that's set behind the federal government and the state government. And there is a lot of rural-urban divide and conflict taking place in America, including in Oklahoma, where you have state legislators that will complain about what Washington is doing to them, but don't realize that they're doing the same thing to the small municipalities in their states. And those are issues that we've got to continue to work on. In the state of Oklahoma, Oklahoma City's metro area is supplying 40% of the state's economy. Tulsa is supplying 30% of the state's economy. The next metro area, Naughton, is supplying 4% of the state's economy. So your takeaway there should be Oklahoma City and Tulsa are supplying 70% of the state's economy. You would think that would demand a great deal of respect at the state legislature. But there is evidence after evidence that it is not demanding the respect that it is. And it makes it more and more difficult in a lot of ways, on economic development ways, in ways that we can provide efficiencies, in ways that we can provide the social services like public transportation. It may be of interest to you to know that per person, the rural parts of the state of Oklahoma get more state dollars for public transit than the urban areas do. That seems to be a little counterintuitive, because when you think of public transit, chances are you're thinking of something that takes place in a city. Yet per capita, our dollars are going to the rural areas for things as basic and simple as public transportation. And what it appears to happen in Oklahoma is that the rural legislators are very organized, and the urban legislators, although we work together at Oklahoma City and Tulsa, and our Chamber of Commerce seem to work pretty good together, and our cities seem to work pretty good together. Legislatively, we have the very nearly a same agenda going to the state legislature. Our legislators that represent the urban areas seem to vote more along party lines than they do urban-rural lines. And so when it comes to debates that seem to imply you take an urban stance or a rural stance, the urban areas seem to be missing out. I wanted to close with just a comment about one of the, I think, success stories that's taking place in Oklahoma City that does not get the attention it deserves, and that is the higher ed and where we're succeeding. Every city in the country is trying to recruit higher ed into its urban areas. And when you draw a circle around Oklahoma City and make it, say, 60 miles radius, and you include the University of Oklahoma and Oklahoma State University, and then the other universities that are within that area, you come up with about 120,000 students. Nearly 1 out of 10 or 1 out of 11 people in that area are college students. That's a tremendously high ratio. It's a tremendous opportunity for us to continue to hire. There's almost no way we could hire all the graduates that are taking place in this area. It would be hard to build an economy strong enough, creating enough new jobs where all of those graduates could locate to Oklahoma City if they wanted to. That's a tremendous resource that I think is underappreciated, both at the legislature and by the general public. In Oklahoma City, we have seen some specific efforts to get more and more involved in what takes place here. And I don't want to exclude schools that I probably will just for the base of time, but you see Oklahoma State increasing its campus size out at 10th and Portland. You see the University of Oklahoma continuing to expand on the medical school and the medical campus. You've seen the University of Central Oklahoma build its Academy of Contemporary Music in Bricktown, and continuing with the Jazz Lab that has just opened up down on the river. These are significant investments by universities that have considerable choices about where they're going to choose to invest. There are communities all over the state that would love to have these amenities, and they have chosen to locate them here, and that should go unnoticed, should not go unnoticed. But today we're going to honor Oklahoma City University and its choice of investing in the old Oklahoma school for its new law school. Let's show a round of appreciation to Oklahoma City University. And this is the award that I'm going to be handing out in a few minutes. But first, I want to spend a couple of minutes just talking about this particular investment. Previous recipients of this award include the Plaza District, the Midtown District, Devon Energy, Chesapeake Energy, the Presbyterian Health Foundation, the Bricktown Property Owners and Merchants Associations, and the Skirvin Hilton Hotel. And in choosing this year to honor Oklahoma City University with its new law school as our iconic development, first of all, it hits on so many of the metrics that we're trying to preserve. First of all, if you are a fan of historic preservation, you have to love this project. It was a vision of creating a downtown law school that connect their university students to our downtown population. A little bit of the history: that school building was first built in 1909. It was designed by Solomon Layton, who also designed the State Capitol and the Skirvin Hotel. And from 1911 to 1968, it was considered the finest school in the city. Then it became a junior high for a few years and then turned into an alternative school. And then it shut down as an educational institute in 1979. In 1981, Southwestern Bell purchased the building to use as their regional offices, and they worked to restore the building to its original state. So a much-needed round of investment from Southwestern Bell. And then at some point, the building became too large because Southwestern Bell at the time was being shrunk. And there is now, I guess, what should be considered a fairly significant meeting. Southwestern Bell officials were meeting with the Oklahoma Farmers Union Mutual Insurance Company about selling the property. So the telephone company was going to sell it to the insurance company. And the meeting was taking place on the morning of April 19th, 1995. And as the bomb exploded just a few blocks away, shards of glass were blown across the conference room. The attendees of the meetings were knocked out of their chairs. And then the hours and the weeks that ensued, the building served as one of our emergency responder command posts. From OCU's perspective, through the years, they had talked about moving to various locations. They looked at the First National Bank building. They looked at the Fred Jones building. They looked at the locations in Bricktown. But finally, they centered on the old Central High School and decided what a great opportunity it would be to return it to an educational use. But it wasn't going to be easy. It obviously had been a long time since it had been an educational facility. The needs of a 21st century law school are much different than that of a high school of 100 years old. How do you work an old auditorium? How do you have interactive classrooms for classrooms that were designed over 100 years ago? And I think it took very much vision from the administration at OCU. I think their board of directors should be praised for of all the options that they have, choosing to invest significant amounts of money into this building. They probably could have built a brand new building somewhere else for what they have gathered and spent to bring this building back to code and back to more than its original glory. But I think everyone in this room is better off because of their decision to build it. As I bring Robert Henry up, I want to thank the Commercial Real Estate Council because they sponsored the fabrication of this award. And you probably go to award banquets throughout your life. I'm telling you, this is one of the finest physical awards you're going to find anywhere. This is a beautiful award, but I think it's symbolic of what Oklahoma City aspires its developers to what to emulate. I mean, we want first-class development, and so if we're going to honor one development a year, it ought to be a very special award. And so please join me in recognizing Oklahoma City University, the School of Law, for the preservation and redevelopment of the old high school into the new Oklahoma City University Law School. And let's welcome to the stage President Robert Henry.
Thank you very much. This is a big day for us.
Let's go over and stand by it. Yeah. It says, award sponsored by the Commercial Real Estate Council, the Mayor's Development Roundtable, presented by the Mayor of Oklahoma City for outstanding development. And then there's a beautiful image here of the School of Law in this award. So please don't leave today by coming up here and doing two things, recognizing how beautiful this particular award is and shaking Robert Henry's hand for having the vision to help bring this OCU Law School to fruition. Robert, thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah, please do.
Well, when you've got it, flaunt it. And this mayor and this city has a vision, and we have a great flaunter in our mayor, and we're proud to be the flauntee today. Churchill didn't say everything he's credited with, but he did say this. He said, first we build our buildings, and then our buildings build us. And there's something to that. This was a magnificent building built at a time when the people in this city wanted to have a great educational institution, an iconic educational institution in a marvelous spot. And it is a beautiful building, to be sure. Solomon Andrew Layton, whom the mayor told you, Skirvin Hotel, Kirkpatrick Auditorium at OCU, remarkable builder. I guess if you want your son to be a good builder, name them Solomon. It's an outstanding facility, and we are so excited to breathe the life of young students and education in the center of our city. I have to thank a few people. First, of course, I want to thank the mayor, who has done everything Oklahoma City University has ever asked him to do. I wish you could have seen him at our grand opening bantering with his protege, Chris Harrison. Chris was talking about his success with The Bachelor and The Bachelorette, and sort of giving the mayor some credit for that, but expressing surprise that you made it all the way to being mayor. But I actually think you got the best of that exchange. Our chairman of our board is an iconic figure himself in the city, Ron Norick, and Ron is out of state today. He is represented, I don't mean that legally, but it could be, by Gary Holmesy, the vice chairman of our board. And we are grateful for Ron's vision, both for this city and for this project. Our dean, who is a recovering federal judge, is here, Valerie Couch, a remarkable dean, remarkable jurist, and we're very proud of her and the vision and creativity she is sponsoring. Bill Shadid is the sine qua non. He's the guy who was struck with this vision and insisted upon bringing everyone repeatedly to the building until we saw what he saw. It was only recently, Mayor, that I figured out what it really was that attracted Bill Shadid, and that is on the southeast corner of that building, there is the largest and most prominent Cedar of Lebanon in Oklahoma City. Bill Mee, who has built and managed so many wonderful buildings, took the leadership role in creating the building and building it and working with the architecture and plans, and he is here today, and we're grateful. Josh Snavely, our Assistant Dean for External Relations, we call him a positive externality. He's been a remarkable feature of this building, too. We're grateful to Bank First and MetaFund for helping us with tax credits, and Gene Rainbolt and David Rainbolt for helping us in many, many ways. This is a unique building. It's brought a lot of blood and excitement. Mayor, I was trying to think about your question about the Austin remark, and I guess I would say that the difference between Oklahoma City and Austin is that our armadillos are alive now. We have progressive things going on and living now. And we have an exciting place, a place where students can go to school at night, like Marion Opala did. Law students can go to school at night. The federal courts, the energy companies, the government agencies are nearby. Internship opportunities exist. Real estate projects are benefiting. So much is happening because we've returned to the iconic vision of the founders of this city to have a remarkable educational institution right in its heart. Mayor, thank you so very, very much, and you are welcome at any time. If you need an office there, we'll make one for you. Thank you.